Today we dive into the lore of the Ayleids, ancient Heartland Elves whose glittering star cities once turned night into living light, and whose downfall still haunts the roots of Cyrodiil. From crystal towers that sang to the heavens, to shadow-forged rebellions that scarred the white gold tower itself, their legacy ripples beneath every Imperial stone. Uncover forgotten rites, shattered pacts with Daedric princes, and the lingering hum of welkynd stones that refuse to fade. Now, let us begin. In the hush of the Dawn era, when Nirn's young horizon still shimmered with vestiges of raw creation, the ancestors of the Ayleids, those who would one day be called the Heartland High Elves, stood upon the southern coasts of Somerset and gazed toward the mainland. Their amber eyes contemplated an expanse of shadowed forests and mist-veiled hills that no living Mer had yet charted. In those years, the Aldmer, first children of Ariel, pronounced O-Riel, knew the pulse of time as an almost musical cadence, slow, resonant, and filled with memory. They sang of the starlit holes Magnus tore in the firmament, and they marked each starfall as both omen and promise. Out of these songs arose a yearning to travel, for the Aldmer believed the firmament's silent quiver meant that hidden wells of magicka lay slumbering far inland, waiting to be awakened by hands that revered the light. Cautiously they prepared. Catamarans of silverwood were corked with guy resin and fitted with pale sails, enchanted to catch even the gentlest of sighing breezes. Archmages wove airy wards against the deep's caprice, while lore singers chanted invocations to Kinnereth, so that the winds would flow as steady companions. At dawn's first blush, a small fleet slipped from Korgrad's inlets, riding the curve of the Abyssian Sea. Every keel that sliced the water felt the weight of hope, that beyond the spray and Gullcall lay a realm where starlight pooled not only above but within the land itself. Those who led the expedition, scholars such as Lianwë of the Varlassu and Tyrilian of the Shimmer Girdle, carried crystalline astrolabes tuned to Magnus's bright wanderings, certain that wherever his rays converged most fiercely, the elven spirit would also shine brightest. Weeks passed in tranquil rhythm, the sea unruffled save for the ghostly hum of spell rigging and the distant copper ring of tumbling sun metal. Then, on a morning thick with salt haze, dark trees emerged upon the horizon, primeval, towering, and wreathed in vapor. The fleet's navigators, guided by star cant and lunar chronometry, steered northeast toward the mouth of a broad river, whose waters glimmered like molten glass. Here the Aldmer learned their first new word from the land itself. In ancient Elnifex, the river named itself Nibel, the sparkling braid. In later eras, men would soften the syllables into Niben, yet the Ayleids forever cherished the older sound, whispering it in reverence each dawn. They anchored in reed-fringed shallows and ventured ashore. Beneath the canopy stretched a labyrinth of vines, colossal ferns, and pillars of root that coiled about sandstone cliffs like the arms of slumbering titans. The air was thick, green gold, filled with the susurrus of unseen insects and the call of iridescent birds. Here and there the explorers found clusters of smooth white stone jutting from earth black as night, stones that faintly pulsed with inner radiance. They recognized in those luminescent veins the signs of welkynd ore, seed crystal of the star rocks that Magnus seeded across the void. Ore trembled in every Merish breast. It was as if the sky itself had seeped into the ground, beckoning them to draw forth a new kind of light. Camps grew swiftly along the river's bends, each enclosed by shimmering wards to hold at bay the humid nights. Scholars etched runes into stone so that their glamours would anchor to soil and root. Soon the first of many inland journeys began. Along game trails and through flower-choked ravines they marched, guided by the slow ripple of magicka that permeated the jungle. The elder tales speak of how Tyrilian, kneeling beside a pool circled by crescent-shaped lilies, saw a ghost white fish glide through sunbeams and leave behind a wake of motes that shimmered like tiny stars. In that moment, the mage declared the land worthy of an altar to starlight, a place where elven kind might pursue perfect harmony with all that shone. Thus arose the earliest seed of Ayleid identity. These pioneers were still Aldmer by blood, yet Cyrodiil, Cyrodiil, began to shape them. The river's breath clung to their robes, the emerald gloom honed their night sight, and the constant chorus of hidden life tuned their senses to subtle pulses of power. They concluded that Magnus's gift was stronger here because starlight filtered through layer after layer of green, refracted by dew, leaf and mineral, until it gathered in crystalline hearts beneath the soil. To harvest that brilliance would require new arts, neither wholly Altmer nor wholly alien. Step by careful step, the Ayleids came into being. Ayleid, literally the people of the eternal dawn, children of light seeking the first glimmer of each morning within stone and water. Among that first generation, Lianwe led the study of the glowing ore. She learned to carve sigils along natural fracture lines, coaxing the stone to split with neither hammer nor chisel. By bathing the shards in moon-drenched waters and singing slow odes to Meridia, Lady of Infinite Energies, she awakened a living flame within each crystal. When these shards were set in rings of meteoric glass, they shone with a star-bright intensity that neither flickered nor dimmed. The Ayleids named them welkynd stones, star-child stones, for each seemed a tiny newborn star nestled in the palm. To place such a stone within a chamber was to call daylight into midnight. Soft, balanced, and unmarred by smoke or oil, welkynd light became the heartbeat of every new settlement. In time, those settlements matured. Timber palisades gave way to terraces of pale marble veined with rose gold, quarried from cliffs overlooking the river. Archmages discovered that when welkynd stones were bound within triple-etched glass, they could refract magicka into latticeworks of force, birthing levitation platforms and luminous bridges that arced across chasms without masonry. The first great city rose upon an island embraced by the Niben, Cyrodiil, the fountain of stars. Here slender towers curved skyward like frozen ribbons of moonlight, each crowned by a halo of dancing motes. Streets wound in spirals rather than straight lines, for architects wished every path to echo Magnus's endless wheel across the heavens. Gardens floated upon hidden lifts, drifting in perpetual bloom above mirror-still canals. Culture blossomed in tandem. Poets composed hymns that blended Elnefec's roots with fresh inflections shaped by waterfall echoes. Artisans inlaid walls with feather-thick crystal tesserae, so that dawn's first beams painted entire atriums with shifting constellations. Priests of Auriel expounded upon the concept of alt num en, the ever-moment, teaching that to perceive the true now one must align the sapphire center of the mind with the moving chorus of stars. Yet alongside this radiant orthodoxy grew subtler devotions. Hidden grottos dedicated to Meridia's living prism, secluded circles that honored Magnus not only as architect of light, but as exile who bled brilliance into the void. These spiritual avenues coexisted without rancor, for difference was seen as a spectrum refracting through a single gem. Still, the jungle was not empty. Spirits older than memory drifted through vine-shrouded ruins left by vanished wanderers. Beneath the roots of strangler fig trees, heavy with serpentine coils, strange glyphs hinted at Elnefe gatherings long turned to dust. No record names open conflict between these wraith cultures and the newcomers. Rather, it seems the early Ayleids treated lingering spirits with sober respect, weaving protective circles around ancestor mounds and leaving votive crystals at sites where green fire wisps danced. This harmony fostered a belief that Cyrodiil's living soul welcomed star-born guests, provided they upheld covenant with land and sky alike. Trade routes unfurled downstream. Slow-keeled barges decked with lantern petals brought welkynd stones to the river mouth, where Direni outposts on the Gold Coast exchanged refined meteoric glass and salt pearls for Somerset silks. From this commerce, the Ayleids gleaned news of sibling cultures. Cousins in Resdain, forging tonal wonders with Dwemer resonators, kin in High Rock mapping the skeins of fate through Direni Chronicle Arcanum, and distant Falmer studying Pale, auroras beneath northern peaks. Each tale spurred the Heartland Elves to rival accomplishments. Soon they embarked on their grandest project, a tower unlike any seen before, designed to unite land and emptiness, present and dawn. The site they chose lay upon a sheer rise above the confluence of the Niben and the lesser-known Minu-Lea River. Here bedrock thrummed with deep-set lunar currents, and a single shard of meteoric metal jutted skyward, half sunk and blackened as if dropped from beyond Lorcan's shattered ribcage. Led by the architect sage Anumaril, masons encased that shard within concentric sheaths of white gold alloy, a union of hammered electrum and void steel smelted from star ore. Layer by layer the tower spiraled upward, each ring inscribed with variable geometry that shifted when moonlight struck. Resulting phase mirrors twisted starlight down through the core, where heart crystals magnified the energies into a sustained auroral column. When the final capstone was set, witnesses described a bloom of silent radiance that expanded across the night, painting clouds with hues no mortal tongue had words to hold. It was not the adamant of Balfiera, the first tower shaped by Anuic, intent, yet in its gleaming symmetry the Ayleids believed they had fashioned a new axis between Mundus and Aetherius. They named it Varlasel. Later, Imperial scholars would render it as the White Gold Tower, though in those earliest days the Ayleids spoke of it more simply as the Spire of Dawn. From its balconies, priests traced the diurnal breath of light over the jungle, observing how rays scattered against mist to birth momentary halos visible only to tuned eyes. Mages wrought star paths from its summit, projecting thought across leagues in beams so narrow they resembled silver threads. Beneath its foundation, scholars scribed treatises on photomancy, positing that every mote of luminescence carried within it the memory of Magnus's flight. Governance crystallized around the spire. Whereas Ultima society on Somerset favored venerable councils and hereditary scions cloistered within ivory courts, the Ayleids preferred a council of archons whose seats rotated every 77 years, aligning with what they measured as a grand cycle of Magnus's subtle dimming and brightening. Each archon represented a constellation of city-states: the Owl of Seyaden, the River Dragon of Ninandava, the unfettered flame of Varlasel itself, and others now lost to overgrowth. Procedure was solemn but unadorned. Decisions emerged through luminous consensus rituals, wherein each archon projected a glyph of mindlight into suspended prisms. When sigils overlapped in harmonious pattern, the matter found resolution. Dissent appeared as shadow fractures, never forbidden, merely deferred until patterns converged again. The culture's vigor soon demanded a formal codex, and so scribes of Khazel, their script akin to liquid geometry, engraved the first tenets of the luminous path. Chief among them was Il-An Telvar, to honor every spark, whether starlight catching dew or consciousness awakening in another's gaze. This creed underpinned architecture, trade, even law. Criminal judgments sought to restore balance of sparked light rather than exact retribution. Theft of a welkynd stone, for instance, required not only return of the gem, but a penitent vigil wherein the culprit fasted beneath open sky until dawn's first beam passed through the stone and struck their brow. In that convergence, thief and gem became mirrors, each reminding the other of value shared. Yet greatness rarely stirs without a shadow. With each welkynd brazier that banished gloom, pockets of deeper darkness lingered beyond the city glow. Some mages discovered that by sealing welkynd brilliance behind void-dampening sigils and feeding it droplets of blood, they could invert its polarity, yielding stones that drank rather than radiated light. These prototypes, Vala stones, reveled in absorption, their surfaces black as the gulf between stars. Scholars argued fiercely over their use. Could they serve as wards against Daedric incursion, or did they invite corruption? The debate fractured into clandestine circles. While public altars to Meridia remained vibrant, hidden conclaves dedicated their nights to Molag Bal's harrowing rhetoric, or Namira's palace of infinite rot. The moral axis of Ayleid society began to tilt, almost imperceptibly, as some pursued illumination by any means. At the heart of this schism stood the twin concepts of light and shadow, not opposites, the sages insisted, but counter-rotating spirals within a single cosmic helix. Light revealed paths, shadow preserved mysteries. Misuse arose only when one path denied the other. Nevertheless, difference sharpened identity. Those who held to pure starlight practices, the later styled light Ayleids, redoubled their reverence for Auriel's throne of dawn. Meanwhile, those who felt the hush of inverted flame sought glyphs of binding deeper in forested sinkholes, where daylight seldom touched. Despite tensions, open war did not arise. Instead, each faction retreated to refined circles of influence, leaving the jungle between seeded with ambiguous relics, half radiant and half devouring. Amid these philosophical tides, the Ayleids first encountered men. The earliest recorded meeting occurred near the upper Niben tributaries, where scouts from Seir Den observed bands of Daedric hunters skinning saber cats with obsidian flake knives. At dawn, the elves approached, bearing offerings of fruit and woven cloth, for they sensed no threat in these ash-brown nomads. The Needies, awed by beings who glowed faintly in welkynd aura, greeted them with songs of Skyfather and Rivermother. For a brief span, exchange seemed mutual. The elves gifted polished green glass arrowheads that never dulled, while men offered root herbs whose juices soothed the fever born of tropical insect sting. Yet underlying astonishment stood a gulf of time perception, where elves measured seasons in subtle star shifts, men counted by the quickening beat of hunt and hearth. Elven stasis, however luminous, soon prickled at human restlessness. Historians cannot pinpoint when the first man willingly entered Ayleid service. Perhaps it began with a Daedric youth who sought to learn crystal craft, but the records affirm that apprenticeships shifted towards servitude with startling speed. The Ayleids, accustomed to the slow maturity of marish children, misunderstood the urgency stamped upon human lifespans. They offered security and purpose. Humans exchanged fleeting years for proximity to wonders beyond imagining, and so the notion of mannish labour within elven walls took root, innocuous at first, a tendril destined to thicken in chapters yet unwritten. In these dawn ages, the jungle itself remained sovereign. Even the white gold tower's beacon failed to pierce every thicket, and beyond lamplit terraces stretched miles of living cathedral, where moss-armoured trunks reached such girth that 10 elves could not link hands about them. Wild nern blooms unfolded at twilight, each petal shimmering, with oils bright enough to stain silk. In such groves, Ayleid botanists learned to brew iridescent draughts that slowed pulse and heightened night vision. They also catalogued predatory vines whose rasping leaves drank blood, and lichen that whispered Elnefex fragments when stirred by midnight wind. Knowledge recorded in silver leaf folios flowed back to city laboratories, inspiring further advances. In bioluminescent architecture, root-grown archways, living colonnades nurtured to glowing maturity under careful spell phrases. Throughout, the Ayleids perceived themselves not as conquerors, but as gardeners of reality, by shaping stone to sing, glass to blaze, and river water to rise in spirals around plaza obelisks. They believed they refined the raw draft Lorcan had scrawled across Mundus. Alongside this creative zeal, came an almost tender sense of responsibility. When a clearing was leveled for new habitation, priests conducted weeping light rites, during which welkynd shards were ground into powder and scattered upon freshly turned soil, an acknowledgement that star matter borrowed from the sky should return in part to feed the roots. Such ceremonies soothed conscience, yet also underscored an emerging paradox: that the greater their mastery, the more delicate the balance they endangered. Contact with Somerset endured by sea roots. Direni emissaries, curious about tales of an inland tower rivaling adamant, ventured upriver and departed, dazzled. They carried back marble samples streaked with faintly humming silver, along with tales of fountains whose spray refracted daylight into visible sigils. In Lilandril's salons, debate churned over whether these Heartland cousins had surpassed Altmeri achievement or merely diverted into perilous novelty. The Direni clan compiled treatises on Cyrodiilic photomancy, respectfully noting breakthroughs, while cautioning against over-reliance on Daedric correspondences. So even beyond the jungle, whispers of Ayleid brilliance stirred admiration and unease in equal measure. It was during this exchange that Anumaril penned the Varlasu Annals, a chronological tablet series etched upon plates of Varla crystal, yes, the light-drinking kind. He believed that only by inscribing memory within absence could future generations discern meaning amid brilliance. To read an annal, one lit a welkynd lantern behind the plate, causing negative space to glow while etched. Glyphs stayed black. Thus, the story emerged in silhouette. The first annal recounted the voyage from Somerset, the founding of Cyrodiil, and the consecration of Varlasel. It ended with a meditation. That light alone dazzles, that shadow alone blinds. But in there, meeting arises sight. This creed became the silent motto of scholarly circles deep within Ayleid society. As seasons flowed into decades, and decades into centuries, the Heartland Elves' identity hardened around three pillars: mastery of crystalline magics, veneration of dawn in both physical and metaphysical aspects, and confidence that their stewardship of Cyrodiil aligned with cosmic design. They traced ancestry not merely to Altmerkin, but to the very architecture of creation. Some called their line the echo of Aetherius, for in welkynd flame they saw a mirror of the primal burst that birthed Nirn. Such certainty glowed benign upon city plazas, yet in private halls it whispered a quieter conviction that no other people could claim equal attunement to the universe's first light. By the time 3 full Archon cycles had turned, the equivalent of nearly 620 years, the Ayleids occupied river valleys from Lake Rumare's misty reach to the crystalline springs of the Upper Sersan. They built acoustic way shrines atop basalt crags, where attendants rang Valiant's chimes at dawn, sending resonant waves across the canopy. They erected observatories whose slit gates tracked Magnus's subtlest tremor, capturing data in arrays of suspended dew droplets. They mapped ley lines throbbing beneath the earth, aligning thresholds so precisely that stepping from one city's court to another's garden required only a single heartbeat and a whispered passphrase. These wonders cemented their reputation among neighboring cultures as beings half made of sky, half of stone. And yet, in all their achievements, none foresaw how swiftly a single divergence in creed could widen into chasm. While artisans perfected the luster of Varlin glass and bards wove hymns bright enough to coax orchids into bloom, certain philosophers turned obsidian mirrors upon their own souls and questioned if starlight alone sufficed to chart destiny. If Magnus once bled light, could not mortals coax a second bleeding to fashion new stars? If dawn marks creation's renewal, might sundown signify a hammer yet undiscovered? These hush-spoken inquiries sowed seeds that would one day sprout into cabals of unsanctioned sorcery. But as Chapter 1 draws to its gentle close, such omens flicker only at the far edges of torchglow, indistinct and unheeded by the majority, who still recline beneath crystalline pergolas, content to dream of future mornings unmarred. Thus, the origins of the Ayleids unfold not as thunderclap, but as gradual illumination. Oldmer curiosity kindled by distant starlight, nurtured by jungle, bloom, tempered by crystalline craft, and magnified through the lens of an ever-rising tower. In this meeting of celestial and terrestrial, the people of the eternal dawn forged a society radiant in purpose and bound, perhaps unknowingly, to cycles of brilliance and eclipse that shape every mortal endeavor. Cyrodiil's mirror bright arcs had hardly set the measure of elegance before neighboring communities reached toward comparable grandeur, and the low roar of artisanal ambition began to sweep the river valleys like a slow, unending tide. East of Lake Rumare, stonemasons from Ninendavar drew plans for a civic heart that would channel dawn in braided shafts down every avenue. South along the upper Minulia, crystal growers in Maricel coaxed welkynd coronae into petal formations, large enough to serve as roof vaults. No decree from any council ordained this flowering, for governance among the Heartland Elves remained a lattice of polite autonomy. Each city-state guarded sovereignty over its myths, yet all shared the underlying conviction that architecture itself could become a hymn to the cosmic chorus. As years unrolled into centuries, those individual hymns formed a vast polyphony of white gold spires, prism cloisters, and terraced sanctuaries threaded by illuminated walkways that hung, weightless, over fern-shaded ravines. At the upstream bend, where the Sersen River joined the Neben, ground fogs rose every dusk in billowing strata. Artificers deemed the place ripe for atmospheric experimentation, and so they laid the foundations of Lorkel, phrased Lorkel to guide tonal emphasis, upon flat platforms etched with harmonic spirals that coaxed the mist to spin in orderly vortices. Over time, those vortices became permanent columns of silvery vapor, each housing within its cool embrace an ascending ring of habitable galleries. Merchants who approached by barge described the sight in hushed voices. Translucent, towers like captive whirlwinds, laced with strands of cyan starlight that pulsed in time with the rise of Magnus at dawn. Within the uppermost chambers, scribes recorded particle trajectories, believing that the eddies hinted at deeper principles, guiding Magicka's tendency to coil through void and substance alike. Thus, Lorkel served simultaneously as observatory, school of natural philosophy, and living sculpture dedicated to cyclical renewal. Further west, perched on obsidian ledges that overhung a tributary gorge, the citadel of Tellienni wielded volcanic basalt as counterpoint to the luminous stones. Favored elsewhere, here, masons fused glassy black rock with narrow veins of moon-charged silver, producing walls that swallowed daylight, yet shimmered under starlight. Visitors crossing the threshold encountered a hush so complete it seemed to drink not only sound, but breath itself. Tellienni's masters claimed such silence perfected introspection, and they dedicated their courts to disciplines of void sense, extended meditations that dissolved individuality into what they termed the great interstice, a tremulous stillness believed to precede all forms of light. The experiments were rigorous and often perilous. More than one adept vanished from bodily sight in search of the interstice and never rematerialized, leaving behind only faint ripples in the crystal instrumentation. Yet achievements of Tellienni reverberated far beyond its basalt parapets, spawning treatises on tonal evocation that later Dwemer scholars would study with both fascination and alarm. Amid this exuberant diversity, Valacel's white gold beacon acted as both focal star and gently steering rudder. Archons gathered beneath its choir-tiered council room, exchanging reports carried along lay-spoke pathways from remote provinces. Topics ranged from harvest yields of luminous root crops to the feasibility of channeling starfall fragments into portable conduits. Resolutions never assumed the coercive flavor of imperial edict. Rather, they manifested as concordances of intention, encoded in the intersecting glyph light each delegate projected during sessions. Should a proposed venture fail to achieve luminous harmony, it waited dormant until succeeding cycles brought divergence into consonance. In this manner, the Heartland Elves nurtured a federation without formal conquest, preserving the impression that each city sang voluntary descant to the tower's long hymn of dawn. The arts flowered alongside statecraft. String instruments of spun glass filaments produced music of shimmering overtones, so delicate that listeners often close their eyes lest sight distract from resonance. Choral assemblies, numbering hundreds, performed standing upon concentric skywalks so that chords folded inward and upward in rising spirals, converging in a single point of harmonic stillness high above the audience. Painters ground welkynd, dust into translucently glowing pigments, rendering panoramas of astral migration across jungle canopies. Stone carvers, meanwhile, developed the subtle craft of inverse relief, chiseling hollows with sub-millimeter precision, so that an observer, viewing from predetermined vantages, perceived floating forms of pure shadow suspended within marble surfaces. The interplay of positive radiance and sculpted absence echoed the philosophical dyad that balanced light and shadow at the root of Ayleid cosmology, and each fresh aesthetic achievement fortified civic identity. Commerce thrived alongside beauty, and soon the Nibben's broad expanse resembled a mirror-struck constellation of barge lanterns. Cargo manifests included mundane staples: rice pods cultivated on floating terraces, fermented sap wines, dried river eel flesh. But the true wealth traded among city-states lay in arcane matrices. Welkynd cores the size of a clenched fist might purchase an entire estate at Cyrodiil, while a single Vala facet honed to absolute absorption often changed hands only by private treaty sealed with oaths of secrecy. Banking houses emerged, staffed by notaries schooled in binding light seals, to guarantee authenticity. A codex of mercantile law, the Lyrith Compact, defined protocols for trans-river exchange rates pegged to variable starlight indices, measured nightly atop the white gold tower. Disputes seldom escalated beyond symbolic duels of geometric logic, performed before impartial Archon scribes, their outcome determined when competing diagrams either aligned or collapsed under analytic scrutiny. Into this gilded weave of ingenuity stepped figures whose renown eventually blurred into near myth. One such was Cillian Naithar, the architect of the liminal bridges. Born in Ninendava, Cillian displayed an early fascination with hinged planes of crystal that refracted footsteps as readily as light. Through decades of experiment, he devised a technique whereby two distant points linked via resonant Vala fissures, permitting transit, both physical and cognitive, along an invisible vector traversing no intervening space. The first public demonstration saw Cillian walk from the echoing choir stalls of Lorkel to the sun-baked balconies of Maracel in the duration of a single heartbeat, leaving behind a faint chime like wind through hollow bone. Revelatory though this was, it unsettled those scholars attuned to cosmic anchoring, for such travel sidestepped the slow devotion of pilgrimage that previously shaped intercity kinship. Debate flared over whether the bridges glorified the dawn's boundless reach or eroded the patience required to apprehend its subtleties. Among Cillian's later writings, preserved on spheres of silvered glass, he mused that space itself was a courtesy the universe extended, not a necessity. His challengers countered that courtesy once refused becomes tyranny. The dispute, unresolved, seeded fresh layers of doctrinal differentiation. Parallel to these civic triumphs, worship evolved into modes increasingly specialized. While early settlers honored Auriel and Magnus with near exclusivity, later centuries witnessed a measured expansion of pantheon. In Cyrodiil, artisan guilds paid seasonal homage to Zinthar, pronouncing the name Zainthar, seeking guidance, in aligning craft with temporal rhythms. River mariners carried polished effigies of Kinnereth in cabin shrines to placate storm currents blossoming from Lake Rumara's breath. Yet it was devotion to Mary Dr that attained the deepest ritual. Complexity, Meridia's spheres of living energy and cleansing radiance, dovetailed so neatly with welkynd philosophy that entire orders of photomancers swore themselves to her service. In vaulted sancta saturated with chromatic beams, they practiced refulgent communion, a trance state wherein consciousness diffused into lattices of pure color. Participants described a blissful dissolution, a sense of self reconstituted as prismatic song. Outside observers noted that returning acolytes often bore eyes flecked with motes of shifting hue, and an acute sensitivity to even the faintest shadow, as though their sight now straddled the margin between mundane and luminous worlds. Not all deific alliances, however, reflected such translucent grace. Deep in the gloom-drowned corridors beneath Ayleids, a city dedicated to concave vaulting that funneled moonlight into subterranean pools, practitioners of inverse radiance nurtured ties with Molag Bal. They argued that bondage and consumption formed inevitable corollaries to freedom and illumination, and that to deny this was to court illusion. Through Vala orbs, they harvested captured luminescence, distilling it into a viscous twilight they called Veyat-Sil, the breath of reversal. In controlled quantities, it granted sorcerers the ability to anchor shadows into tactile forms, sculpting living silhouettes that acted as servitors. Rumors drifted along trade routes of shadow guardians witnessed gliding through Ayleids' arcades, their fingers tapering into filamentous strands that unraveled into nothing whenever lantern beams struck them. The Archon Council tolerated such experiments only so long as their consequences remained confined. Yet lineages committed to darker pursuits gradually fortified their precincts behind curtains of ever-deepening night. At the confluence of these, competing energies stood the populace of mannish origin. What began as small bands of Nedic artisans and labourers assimilated into crystalline workshops soon expanded into multitudes, as word spread along human migratory paths of cities where hunger seldom reached and illnesses bowed before starlight. Elixirs. Each generation of men therefore found itself stepping into an environment whose wonders eclipsed the last, yet whose hierarchies hardened in equal measure. The Ayleids, perceiving temporal brevity in their mannish neighbours, rationalized an increasingly paternal stance. They framed induction into service as safeguarding humans from the raw powers swirling through Heartland air, offering shelter in exchange for obedience. Roles diversified: canal dredgers, crystal polishers, diurnal caretakers of garden terraces where elves slept through midday heat. Some positions attained relative prestige: scribal aides who maintained numeric ledgers for the Lirith Compact, or sanctuary choirs trained to pronounce Elnefek's invocations in human throat registers that produced resonances elves could not achieve. Yet the dominion remained absolute. Permission, not partnership, defined mannish participation in the luminous economy. Even within elven circles, dissent regarding such stewardship grew persistent. Philosophers of the Solan Viridian school posited that over-reliance on servile participation risked stagnation of the Ayleid mind. They cited observations of complacency among upper-tier artisans whose designs lapsed into ornate repetition rather than daring innovation. The Council of Archons received these warnings with grave attention but little immediate action, preferring to trust that cultural inertia alone could not dim a civilization whose very sustenance derived from living light. Consequently, the practice of bondage, codified through contracts engraved upon crystal tablets, continued unimpeded. Over decades, frustration among human captives fermented into discrete networks of moon's edge communication, whispered songs that carried messages through water conduits, braid knots in servant hair that conveyed timing of guard rotations, or simple tokens of solidarity carved from discarded welkynd shards. A growing sense of historical layering pressed upon Heartland society. Younger Ayleid scholars compared the annals of Anumaril with recent events and perceived subtle drift between founding ideals and present complexities. Treatises circulated referencing the resonant disparity, a measure of divergence between luminous intention and lived practice. In academic quartets across Maricel and Cyrodiil, symposiums convened to debate whether the disparity signaled natural evolution or illness of spirit. Those who deemed it illness advocated a return to ascetic simplicity. Fewer towers, fewer Valar experiments, greater reverence for the untouched canopy. Their critics countered that stasis equated to decay, that only through relentless amplification of light could Merish destiny fulfill its promise. Gradually, camps coalesced into the previously hinted factions, devotees of clarion radiance and adherents of enveloping shadow. One particular episode crystallized the dividing line. An expedition dispatched from Tel Yenni detected a meteor fall in the Velethra foothills west of the river. Survey teams recovered a black star metal node the size of a large hound, its surface etched by natural angles so sharp they cut even tempered glass. Initial analyses suggested the node absorbed ambient magicka at a prodigious rate, then emitted minute bursts of patternless resonance. The light faction proposed sealing the node within a containment prism high atop the white gold tower, studying it as a potential key to celestial origins. The shadow faction argued that its hunger mirrored the hidden aspect of creation, that through communion with such substance, they might unlock new thresholds beyond dichotomous radiance. Deadlock endured across 3 full council convocations, until the Archon of Nin Endavar, Saranwe, the Prism Singer, broke tradition and cast a decisively personal verdict. The node would be entrusted to joint oversight. A research citadel was established upon neutral ground, staffed by scholars representing both philosophies and guarded by a rotation of mind wardens chosen for unshakable impartiality. The arrangement proved fragile. After 17 years, the node's resonance abruptly synchronized with unknown arcane frequencies, and all custodians disappeared in a single night. Left behind were only charred diagrams fused into the floor, their sigils contorted into spirals of scorched glass. The catastrophe seeded renewed apprehension that energies beyond customary spectrums lurked, awaiting incautious summoners. Political lines edged toward militarization. While open warfare remained unthinkable, city-states began fielding ceremonial cohorts of arcane guardians. They wore mail of interlaced Valar scales and wielded javelins tipped with memory glass that split into beams upon impact. Officially, these cohorts served as honor guards during transit of luminous artifacts, yet their presence on river quays and skybridge junctions constituted latent deterrence. Command over these units lay not with sovereign kings, none such titles existed, but with councils of magistrates appointed through the same harmonious vote method as other public offices. The logic held that distributed command prevented consolidation of martial ambition. Nevertheless, recorded instances of friction multiplied. In one case, a Nin Endava cohort barred entrance to Lorkel engineers investigating reported instability in bridge pylons, citing jurisdictional privilege. Days later, the bridge collapsed in a thundering cascade, severing trade lines for a season and arousing rumors of sabotage. Inquiry panels convened, but found only ambiguous evidence, their final pronouncements coded in the tempered language of regret without attribution. Yet daily life for the average Heartland elf retained a surface sheen of languid tranquility. Dawn would slide over serrated treetops, igniting lattices of dew-jeweled ivy. Balustrades soared into frescoed courtyards, where luminescent koi drifted through suspended water globes shaped by continuous telekinesis loops. Scholars drifted between lecture alcoves on levitation discs flanked by streaming ribbons of soft light. At night, lamprites sent flocks of tiny crystal motes, each carrying pinpoints of captured starlight, into the upper air, where they drifted like living constellations overhead. Children learned to guide these motes with gestures, tracing ancestral glyphs radiant against the dark. Festivals marked the acme of celestial phenomena. During an especially rare syzygy known as the harmonic confluence, every city dimmed its lamplight so that welkynd domes pulsed in synchronized cadence with ethereal tides. Observers described a hush descending upon the realm, as though even insects deferred to the vast choir of heavens singing through crystalline spires. Preservation of knowledge found physical embodiment in the Mindarayan, a sprawling labyrinth of scroll repositories carved beneath Valasel. Corridors lined with mirrored crystal amplified lamplight so efficiently that a single candle lit an entire wing. Within alcoves, monastic scribes transcribed each civic record onto plates of orichalcum, sealed in atmospheres of inert gas to prevent patination. They also curated the song orbs, spherical matrices, wherein oral histories were encoded via harmonic imprinting, capturable only through disciplined listening. Initiates underwent years of tonal calibration to discern the multi-layered narrative, threads embedded within a single note. The practice had precedent among Dureni sound mages, yet Ayleid refinement elevated it to near spiritual union. Some orb sagas lasted days, composed of interwoven harmonic filaments unfolding in fractal recursion. The Mindarayan thus safeguarded a living archive, accessible not by sight alone, but by trained inner ear, ensuring that memory survived even if written glyphs turned to dust. Amid such abundance, scarcity adopted subtler masks. Social aspiration among elves crystallized around invitations to the radiant salons, private gatherings hosted in rotating sequence by prominent mage families. At these salons, guests debuted experimental magics as performances. One season might reveal a kinetic tapestry woven from trapped rainbows. Another, an aroma chorus in which scents of distant seasons burst sequentially like chords. Prestige derived not solely from spectacle, but from perceived alignment with Dawn's ethos. When a young luminary named Alien Veyat displayed a phantom tableau depicting the moment Lorcan's heart struck Red Mountain, the audience found the vision too raw, too blood-heavy. Hushed murmurs slid through the galleries that Alien flirted with morbid fascination, and invitations dwindled thereafter. Thus, the salons acted as both crucible of innovation and quiet regulator of taste, channeling experimentation along lines comfortable to mainstream sensibilities, a pattern that, in hindsight, lulled many to ignore how far the boundary of permissible exploration had already shifted. Throughout the wider world, other Merish cultures observed Heartland ascendancy with complex emotions. The Bosmer of Valenwood, bound to the Green Pact, viewed the crystalline towers with a mixture of envy and caution, whispering that to imprison light in stone risked angering Yfra's wild harmonies. The Dwemer, busy layering subterranean halls under Resdane, dispatched occasional envoys to exchange resonator schematics for welkynd samples, always testing, always withholding. Even the Dureni, proud patriarchs of Merethic sorcery, sensed the pivot in arcane supremacy. Some historians speculate that clan petitions to unify Tamriel under Dureni law partly arose from a desire to contain Ayleid influence before it eclipsed distant Somerset entirely. Diplomats traversed the Abetian, cloaked in formal civility, but between every polished compliment lay unspoken calculations of power. And then, as though cued by cosmic dramaturgy, an event of meteorological magnitude shook the stability of the age. A solar flare of unprecedented ferocity rippled through the upper atmosphere, distorting Magnus's highway with radials of emerald fire visible at midday. Across Cyrodiil, welkynd stones resonated in sympathetic vibration so intense that their usual azure glow leapt to incandescent white. In Lorkel, the mist spires dissipated under the energy surge, scattering vortices that rained ionized droplets upon stone avenues. In Sayadin, certain levitation bridges flickered out, dropping whole platforms into canal basins now boiling with residual charge. Emergency conclaves summoned every available photomancer. Their diagnosis declared the flare a once-in-millennium phenomenon known as thalasia, the star candle hour, when Magnus's path briefly grazes an uncharted fold in the mundus ether limen. Preparations for such an event existed only in theoretical treatises. Its sudden reality exposed the fragility beneath luminous splendor. The crisis prompted a rare display of pan-faction coordination. Light and shadow practitioners combined talents, weaving equilibrium lattices that channeled surplus energy into deep earth reservoirs, while Vala gourds absorbed stray redshift emissions. Over 7 days, the realm moved in coordinated rigor, with human laborers executing relay chains to ferry supplies, and elven artificers recalibrating matrix cores. When the flare abated, spires yet stood, but oversight committees documented fractures in photomantic infrastructure more extensive than publicly acknowledged. Many crystals had subtly realigned at molecular layers, reducing redundancy thresholds. Reconstructive efforts began at once, but the revelation seeded doubt regarding the infallibility of Ayleid mastery. Even celebrants of Daedric gnosis recognized in the flare evidence of powers indifferent to merish aspiration. Within that interlude of vulnerability, murmurs circulated among human servants that illumination might not protect against every cosmic upheaval. If the flare struck again, who would stand shieldless in the open plazas while archons retreated into protected chambers? Though no immediate rebellion erupted, watchers later traced a sharpening of clandestine alliances across servant quarters. Night after night, singers of the old ways convened behind laundry atria, intoning low chants to Kinnereth and Stendar, forging spiritual muscle memory that would serve them in decades to come. Meanwhile, elves returned to older devotions with intensified fervor. Temples expanded choirs, doubling dawn rites, as though louder praise could avert further celestial tempests. In private observations recorded on Vala plates, the sage Tala Indral concluded that the Heartland society now stood balanced upon a fulcrum. On one side gleamed the weight of accrued splendor, cities arrayed like jewels, knowledge deep enough to coax starlight into speech. On the other gathered strands of tension, philosophical schisms, quiet unrest, creeping overconfidence. Should any unforeseen pressure tilt the beam, equilibrium would give way, sending one mass crashing downward while the other flared upward into uncharted darkness. Tala Indral proposed enhanced interchange between factions, stronger protections for mannish wards, and renewed humility before cosmic choreography. His peers commended the treatise, filed it in the Mindarayan, and resumed reconstruction of fallen bridges. Thus the pivot endured, invisible to daily traffic, waiting for the faintest nudge. Seasons progressed, and with each sun cycle, the resonance of disparity widened. In Maricel, a cabal known as the Auric Refractors unveiled a ritual promising to split welkynd cells into microstars that generated far greater lumens per shard. The demonstration lit plaza arcades so brightly that onlookers suffered retinal burn despite protective veils, and leaf litter spontaneously burst into flame across a radius of 30 cubits. Such excess only sharpened calls among conservative orders to limit radical photomancy. Yet demand for brighter light to power new mage lifts and dream theatres drove further investment. In Laia Leia, conversely, Varsindic scholars showcased a mirror capable of inverting radiant signatures to render any object visually non-existent. Nobility coveted the device for private intrigue, while reformists lamented erosion of transparency. Agreements restricting its use collapsed under weight of covert commissioning. Amid escalating virtuosity and latent peril, whispers began of an individual whose heritage straddled mortality and outer might. Umaril the Unfeathered, pronounced Uma-Ril. Reports varied. Some described a towering Ayleid lord adorned in armor, forged from Valrip, Fa, meteor iron, feathers absent to signify shedding of corporeal restraint. Others swore his bloodline mingled with that of an unnamed Daedric prince, granting him an aura of searing authority. Whatever the truth, Umaril's emergence coincided with gatherings of shadow adherents who sought unifying emblem. His sermons, delivered beneath abandoned stargazing platforms, framed dominion not as stewardship, but as birthright. He contended that the Star Candle Hour had revealed a cosmos ripe for deliberate rewriting by those bold enough to wield both light and dark, without apology. While archons attempted to summon him for dialogue, his retinues drifted beyond summons, weaving through margins of the jungle like reflections given independent stride. Thus, as the realm approached its apex, one might stroll through Varlacells, gleaming courts on any given morning and sense no trace of fracture. The fountains still flowed in glassy arcs. Choirs still sang the dawn's thousand names. But if one listened beneath surface cadence, another pulse beat there, subtle yet accelerating. A pulse of contesting truths on collision course. In a private chamber high within the white gold tower, the elder chronicler Anumaril inscribed, "A final dateline upon the 6th Varlasu annal. Dawn perfects only itself. Shadow perfects the story." He sealed the plate, set it in its cradle of emptiness, and closed his eyes, as though bracing for a vast wind not yet risen, but nearing with inevitability. The scholars who convened in the argent libraries of Varlacell often likened the age to a double-lit corridor. One wall mirrored welkynd radiance in prisms of ordered pattern. The other absorbed that very glow into depths of Varla glass where no reflection stirred. To walk between them demanded constant attunement, for light and its negation were no longer passive features of the world, but living principles, articulated by thought, forged by artifice, and bent toward purposes divergent enough to reshape fate itself. In this corridor, the Ayleids strode with supreme confidence, yet ever more frequently the corridor shuddered with vibrations none could name, and echoes gathered in the listening spaces like distant thunder beneath crystal floors. Long before the present tensions, the southern jungles had provided fertile ground for metaphysical inquiry. Botanists cataloguing noctilucent orchids noted that petals under certain star phases glowed in counter-rhythm to the sky, absorbing instead of emitting. This prompted the first controlled experiments in inverse photomancy, a craft soon formalized under the term Valcellen, the path of folding radiance. Practitioners observed that when a stream of welkynd light passed through a lens etched with equal measures of Mer-Idiac script and void-aligned sigils, the ray bifurcated, one channel emerging brighter, the other darker by an identical degree, as though the beam had split into promise and debt. The brighter line they called Cyrodiil, the singing thread, the darker, Dolliz, the silent counterpart. At first, Cyrodiil dominated scholarly fascination. By multiplexing singing threads through crystal matrices, the photomancers powered levitation, crucibles, aerial gardens, and the subtidal scatterlights that kept canal water free of predatory molds. Soon, however, mathematicians trained in harmonic calculus demonstrated that without precise compensation, Dolliz values accumulated throughout any closed system. When those values reached a critical resonance, the field collapsed into shadow, consuming all stored luminance in a single pulse. A mere academic dilemma at first, the problem became urgent after a rupture in Maracell's high canticle chamber reduced a vaulted hall to ash-grey slag in the space of one heartbeat. Witnesses described no roar or flare, only a soft, rushing sigh as every lantern, every welkynd sconce, every hovering swirl of decorative motes winked out, leaving stone to sag and crumble. In the vacuum of brilliance, heat and form parted ways. No casualties occurred. Nighttime rites had not yet begun. But the event seeded new fear, that mastery of light required equal mastery of its hungry reflection. Into this debate stepped the logician mage Cyrodiil, whose treatise, On the Coherence, of apertures formalized what later ages would call the light-shadow concordance. Cyrodiil argued that all luminance drawn from Magnus's diaspora, not merely welkynd charge, carried within it a tether to a hypothetical node of negative potential, somewhere beyond the lunar lattice. Every application of light thus tugged upon an unseen chain, and to ignore that tension was to court backlash. His solution: pair every public Cyrodiil lattice with a Daedric reservoir, a structured void designed to absorb reverberant debt harmlessly. The proposal satisfied neither extreme. Light devotees objected that raising shrines to absence invited spiritual stagnation. Shadow devotees derided the plan as an attempt to domesticate the sublime. The Archon Council, wary of catastrophe yet loath to stifle progress, authorized limited trials. Cyrodiil's reservoirs were installed beneath Lorkel's reconstituted vortices, and early readings suggested near-perfect phase balance. But as, with many Ayleid innovations, success bloomed new complexities faster than ethos could bloom restraint. For while Cyrodiil's arrays stabilized public infrastructure, independent scholars extrapolated his mathematics into more daring applications. Suppose, they mused, a Daedric reservoir could be wielded not merely to nullify excess light, but to store it, convert it, and release it under controlled inversion. What form of energy might that yield? Could one craft a blade of condensed night fire, or weave a mantle of refracted absence impenetrable to mundane harm? Such conjectures were no longer whispered solely in Ayleids' sunken temples. Amateur circles in Ninandava, Cyrodiil, even Valacel's artisan quarter began replicating miniature reservoirs, shrouding experiments in secrecy to avoid moral censure. Success, when it arrived, appeared subtle. The first functional Daedric shard emitted neither glow nor heat, only a faint vertigo in the stomachs of those nearby, as though their sense of weight momentarily untethered. Yet when the shard was tuned against a welkynd core, the vertigo became euphoria, and subjects exposed reported heightened perception of temporal rhythm, the beat of distant constellations pulsing through their bones. The revelations spread like quiet wildfire. Shadow, properly harnessed, granted senses beyond the polite luminance of dawn. The Daedrotheon temples watched these developments with sharpened interest. Meridia cults maintained primacy among starlit disciplines, yet lesser-attended shrines to Nocturnal received new pilgrims. Magisters who sought sanction to plumb, void resonance beyond civic supervision. Nocturnal's clergy, long practiced in safeguarding secrets within secrets, offered petitions of veiled covenant. The faithful would surrender a single memory of personal joy in exchange for passage through the cloistered dark, an only half-metaphoric descent into sensory deprivation chambers lined with Vala veils. Emerging acolytes boasted the ability to see warm currents of magicka threading the air, knowledge invaluable in refining Dolly's manipulation. Walkers in light observed such transformations with anxiety, claiming that the glow in the aspirants' eyes had cooled to a hue less akin to sunlight and more like the insipid gleam seen on river scales under moonless sky. Yet not all alliances formed with Daedric patrons of absence. Among the light Ayleids, interrogation of brilliance reached heights as vertiginous as their rivals' journey into dark. The Order of the Last Prism, headquartered in cliff-carved precincts of Minsirian, undertook the Great Refrangiance, a decades-long ritual wherein a colossal welkynd lens refracted 7 converging beams into a core lattice wrapped by a coil of meteoric electrum. Day and night the lens operated, its beam paths adjusted minutely to track Magnus across the heavens. Chroniclers recorded that the core soon produced living fragments of photic syllable, coalesced runes of pure light that vibrated audible notes. When sung in Ilnifex, those notes unlocked strata of awareness described as hearing the color of origin. But the ritual exacted cost. Ambient temperature within 2 leagues rose noticeably. Insects perished in swarms, and rivers downstream of Min Sirion ran dry each mid-afternoon, their water apparently transmuted into vapor by stray resonance. City-state delegates debated whether to shutter the lens, yet the Order assured them an imminent revelation would justify the collateral. For the moment, prestige outshone caution. Throughout this volatile renaissance, Umaril the Unfeathered gathered adherents at a pace few predicted. His doctrine fused light and shadow not by reconciliation, but subjugation. Radiance would blaze, hotter when cast through the furnace of enslaved dark, and the product, call it dawnfire, he preached, would elevate its wielders beyond dwindling flesh. Umaril offered no treatises, no geometric proofs. Instead, he furnished demonstrations. In the woodland amphitheatre of Tai Indar, he conjured a sphere of white gold flame, clasped in talons of onyx shadow, that neither scalded nor chilled, yet shattered a granite monolith at wordless command. Witnesses swore the flame shrieked as, though alive, a keening trill rooted somewhere between anguish and rejoicing. Within a fortnight, envoys from at least 6 minor city-states pledged support, supplying material, test subjects, and cryptic tomes said to predate the Crystal Era. The Archons could not ignore Umaril's ascent. A delegation led by Irandaril, Archon of the Unfettered Flame, ventured into the outer jungles to negotiate. They found only empty encampments and sigil-scarred trunks where Umaril's sigil, a stylized glyph intertwining dawn ray and eclipse, glimmered faintly even at noon. Palpable seemed the sense of ceremony abandoned moments prior. Campfires still smoldered, crystals still hummed. Interpreting the scene as calculated warning, Irandaril returned and urged a coalition of light cities to erect perimeter wards around the white gold tower. Shadow-aligned magistrates protested the unilateral militarization, citing jurisdictional overreach. Debate turned acrimonious, and for the first time in recorded minutes, an Archon sigil shattered during luminous vote, dispersing into sparks before resolution. The assembly dissolved amid a blizzard of falling light, its members departing, in silence. Meanwhile, the Dollis engineers completed a breakthrough of their own. The Veyat Lattice, a grid of counter-rotating shadow spirals capable of nullifying welkynd emissions across predetermined vectors. Tested beneath Leia, the lattice darkened a plaza, broad as 2 temple quadrants, rendering even midday sun to dusk-blue gloom within its bounds. Predictably, light advocates decried the experiment as blasphemous occlusion. Shadow proponents hailed it as proof that ordered void might yet surpass chaotic dawn. Neither camp admitted the most disturbing implication. If perfected, the Veyat Lattice could quench defensive wards of any light city without breaching its outer walls. Bloodless siege through deprivation of brilliance. As metaphysical arms races escalated, lesser artisans found livelihoods reshaped by demand. Gem cleavers shifted from ornamental trade to strategic fabrications. Facetted concentrators for light factions, void core dampeners for shadow patrons. Pedestrian craftsmen who once carved acacia fretwork now learned to inlay null iron filaments that disrupted cetus pattern resonance, thereby protecting domiciles from stray photomantic surges. Among mannish laborers, tales spread of secret forges where human artisans reverse-engineered Vala dust into smoke crystals capable of blinding Ayleid sentries. Distribution remained minuscule, but the rumor alone fueled hushed optimism. If elves relied increasingly on light as weapon and currency, perhaps men could turn their absence into shield and knife. Into the Mindarion's mirrored halls flowed eyewitness accounts amassed by tireless chroniclers, a mosaic of revelations, warnings, and half-buried confessions. Analyst lawmasters cross-referenced patterns, mapping zones where Dollis manipulations spiked illness among fauna, where Cyrodiil saturations bleached foliage to ash. One cartographer flagged an alarming convergence. The lines of highest light practice and deepest shadow research intersected in a spiral that tightened, season by season, around Lake Rumare and the white gold tower at its core. The map, presented to the council, prompted an emergency conclave. Attendance proved thin. Several shadow-aligned archons claimed indisposition. Light archons arrived flanked by escort cohorts wearing helms fashioned in sunburst motif. Discussion floundered on semantics until word arrived that the marble piers of Tel Yen Ni had blackened overnight, every torch guttering to oily smoke. On those piers, officials discovered a single shard of meteoric iron etched with umarils, sigil still warm despite dawn breeze. The crisis forced a fracturing long postponed. Light cities convened in High Synod and announced the Radiant Edict. Any practice of dollars manipulation beyond maintenance reserves would be forbidden within 3 Archon cycles. All Vala stocks above a specified absorption coefficient must be surrendered for neutralization. In response, shadow-aligned city-states formed the Covenant of Reverent Gloom, pledging collective defense against Luminarch imposition. Diplomatic envoys flickered between towers, yet each carried shields of spectral night or radiant flares, signifying negotiations as theatre more than conciliation. Through these maneuvers, the everyday rituals of dawn persisted, though thinned by vigilance. In Sayaden's once serene fountain quarter, citizens now paused at each bridge to pass through luminescence gates that scanned for covert void resonance. Markets still traded sculpted blossoms of opal glass, but every stall paid levy toward the arcane sentinels, a watchforce empowered to arrest without convening luminous consensus. In Laia, conversely, streets glowed faintly blue even at midnight, an enchantment siphoning ambient starlight to fuel deeper reservoirs below. Residents adapted by navigating via polished obsidian mirrors that reflected hidden waymarkers. In spectrum-inverted glyph, faint tension rippled through voices, through curt gestures of traded coin, through half-averted glances between groups whose attire signaled allegiance. Beyond urban hearts, the jungle lamented. Botanists were first to notice. Flowers of the Myrule species failed to open at dawn, sap thickening to tar. Tree frogs lost bioluminescent bellies, their chirps gone silent. When healers examined river nurses, an eel-like creature central to rural medicine, they found crystalline lesions in organ tissues, akin to micro-welkynd shards but dull, inert. Scholars argued over cause. Light magi cited shadow poisoning. Shadow apothecaries blamed overstimulation by stray Cyrodiil flux. Whatever the trigger, the green withdrew. Vines browned early, canopy gaps widened, and flocks of glassy-winged moths migrated north into Colovian hills, where traditional Ayleid influence waned. Rural stewards pleaded for intervention. The Archon Council, now bifurcated into splinter quorums, could render no coherent policy. As ecosystems faltered, food shipments dwindled. For the first time in 3 centuries, Sayadin rationed night orchid bread. Yet the high orders pressed on, each convinced salvation lay in total realization of their path. Umaril's following, meanwhile, transcended faction lines. Light extremists admired his promise of perfected dawnfire. Shadow radicals craved the authority inherent in consuming radiance itself. Rumors spoke of a hidden fortress, Var Labir, located where ley lines of both Cyrodiil and Dolliz converged. Within its walls, Umaril's thralls reportedly forged Ankrath armor, pronounced Ankrath, plate-bound composites of Vala iron quenched in photic tears, siphoned from unwilling welkynd cores. Blades so tempered left wounds that neither light nor shadow magic could cleanse, for each slice inverted local magicka, rendering flesh an echo of itself. Confirmation proved elusive. Scouts dispatched by both coalitions vanished without trace, but sightings multiplied of armored figures striding jungle paths, their gauntlets trailing embers too pale for flame, too bright for lightning, phenomena that left charred footprints which pulsed as though breathing. In desperation, certain light sovereigns reopened correspondence with Daedric cousins across the Abyssian. Delegations sought assistance in stabilizing tower harmonics, now prone to quaver with each sunrise. The Daedric, wary of entanglement, offered advisory treatises but withheld strategic interventions. They counseled moderation, reduce welkynd output, impose moratoria on Dolly's research, restore humility before the Aedra. The pleas fell upon ears overstrained by internal strife. Regional magistrates implemented temporary dampening, yet refused structural rollback. Among shadow realms, envoys ventured south to the border villages of Valenwood, promising Bosmer tribes new avenues of nocturne energy if they would harass light supply lines. The Bosmer, bound by the Green Pact and distrustful of all crystal-bound culture, provided little more than cryptic warnings. Still, the overture revealed the Covenant's willingness to enlist any ally should conflict escalate. Amid this chessboard of luminous doctrine stood a single edifice whose significance none disputed, the white gold tower, origin and axis of Heartland destiny. Philosophers across faction lines agreed that if light and shadow waged open war, control of the tower would decide outcome. Its root anvil contained the central gradient lens through which original Dawnflare pooled realities. Its upper terraces maintained the spire choir that tuned ley flows throughout Niben Basin. Knowing this, light archons stationed radiant guard along the tower's outer terraces, each sentinel equipped with mirrored halberds that refracted assaults into radiant scatter. In answer, Covenant artificers unleashed voyant spores, airborne, motes that drifted invisibly until they settled upon tower stone, whereupon they burrowed microscopic channels aimed to leach welkynd signatures into Dolly's sinks hidden deep beneath the earth. Discovery of these spores ignited panic. The guards' cleansing torches scorched entire mural galleries to purge infestation, their flames leaving swaths of blackened marble across once pearl-white corridors. Major hostilities still flickered, at the edge of possibility, but skirmishes ignited in peripheral districts. Along the Shimmerwade Causeway, a light convoy ferrying replacement welkynd cores encountered shadow saboteurs who unleashed a resonance canceller, extinguishing lantern auras and plunging the bridge into night. The convoy's escort, deprived of sight attuned to brilliance, fell quickly. Shipment stones vanished. 3 dawns later, a shadow barge loaded with Vala ingots capsized when unseen light archmages inverted the river beneath it, momentarily turning water to glass before letting it shatter into lethal shards. Survivors limped ashore, blinded by refractive shrapnel. The civilian populace, increasingly disillusioned, gravitated towards secrecy, some hoarding neutral charms said to insulate the wearer from both luminescent glare and devouring gloom. Forged by an underground syndicate calling itself the Grey Loom, these amulets employed flawed parley runes of Stuan and Junal reimagined in subtle Elnafex loops. Whether they worked remained doubtful, but belief offered comfort. In servant quarters, men and Mir alike recited old prayers to Stendar, pleading for mercy neither faction seemed able to provide. A new undercurrent of syncretic worship emerged, quiet gatherings around candle-lit icons that depicted Magnus and Nocturnal, seated side by side, rays and raven feathers mingling in gentle spiral. For such heterodoxy, participants risked censure from both camps, yet the meetings multiplied, their songs low, soothing, utterly unlike the strident hymns now echoing through contested streets. Deep within the Mindarayan, scribes undertook the perilous task of compiling the Convergence Codex, a chronicle of every recorded intersection between high-grade Cyrodiil corridors and Dolly's wells. Projection diagrams revealed a date, uncertain by only a handful of star cycles, when the overlapping spirals would lock in geometric harmony or catastrophic discord. If harmonious, scholars predicted a fusion event birthing a new luminous constant with potential to rejuvenate jungle and soul alike. If discordant, the same infusion would rend local reality, unleashing void flare cascades that could hollow Cyrodiil to husk. Word of the Codex leaked, warped, and resurfaced as prophecy. In taverns, servants whispered that the world would either dawn twice on the foretold morning or plunge into endless eclipse. Extremists on both sides raced to tilt convergence toward outcome favorable to their creed, while moderates prayed for postponement only divine intercession might grant. Meanwhile, under the canopy shadowed by tension, isolated Ayleid mystics sought a third path. These lumen seers dissembled from cities, carrying miniature star graves, terracotta urns filled with powdered welkynd mixed with pulverized vala, in hopes of seeding balanced nodes across wilderness. Their journals spoke of micro-harmonies where fireflies danced even at noon, their abdomens flashing alternately bright and dark in perfect cadence. Yet many of these enclaves succumbed to raiders aligned with Umoril, who considered balance a coward's refuge. Survivors who returned to urban courts bore haunted gazes and warned that the unfeathered lord now studied tower theory, seeking to graft Dolly's reservoirs directly into the white gold lattice. Should he succeed, Dawnfire might expand across the Heartland unchecked, binding both luminescence and void to his singular will. Apprehension reached fever pitch when glaciated thunder rolled across an azure clear sky, an impossible meteorological phenomenon. Oracle Magi, attuned to the tune of wind spirits, sensed the rift where two weather paradigms collided, a heatwave driven by light ritual in Minserian meeting a chill front conjured through Dolly's condensation near Tel Yen-Ni. The clash birthed lightning of lavender hue that struck jungle towers indiscriminately, fusing root and branch into glassy sculptures that rang like bells in aftershock breeze. In its wake, both factions accused each other of weaponizing weather. In truth, the phenomenon arose as byproduct of unsynchronized grand workings, yet that nuance drowned beneath recrimination. During the emergency council assembled to address climate destabilization, a messenger arrived bloodied, clutching a half-melted welkynd shard. Her testimony shattered even jaded delegates. The Order of the Last Prism had attempted final attunement of their great refrangiance and failed catastrophically. The lens array imploded, releasing an axial burst of photic rune that vaporized 3 tiers of Minserian and punched a crystalline spear of fused daylight into cloud deck above. As the plume settled, survivors witnessed after images of unknown, constellations burnt into their retinas, star patterns unrecorded in any Ayleid sky chart. Astronomers theorized the pulse pierced the lunar barrier, exposing glimpses of distant ethereal tracks. Shadow scholars saw vindication. Unbridled light led only to ruin. Light loyalists countered that sabotage must have played part, pointing to Dolly's anomalies discovered in fractured lens fragments. Accusations blurred into conflict, and by dusk of that very day, skirmishes erupted in 4 outlying boroughs near Lake Rumar. Umaril's armies chose that moment to discard subterfuge. Emerging from Var Labir, they marched beneath banners woven of alternating sun gold and void black threads. Armor gleamed with seething twilight. Weapons dripped motes that scorched the air into hissing vacuoles. Their ranks included human auxiliaries, promised elevation, as well as elven zealots whose eyes flickered with both pale flame and shadow swirl. Witnesses in river outposts described the approach as sunrise behind midnight cloud, light leaking around a dark mass, yet never driving it away. In response, light and shadow coalitions declared temporary armistice, acknowledging Umoril, a threat to both. Composite forces assembled along the eastern ridges, radiant guard lines interspersed with cloistered dark phalanxes, each unit distrustful but resolute. On a dawn heavy with copper haze, the Heartland's internal war paused, its energies redirected toward a foe embodying the very synthesis they had failed to reconcile within council chambers. What transpired upon those ridges the next days survives in fragments only. Some say Umarill called down a halo eclipse, a corona of blazing blackness rimmed by molten white gold. Others speak of hymns sung in notes above mortal hearing that cracked welkynd crystals to dust and made Valar pools boil. What is certain? The armies hurled every expression of their paths, lances of light that arced like comets, spears of shadow that tunneled through mid-air, and the sky wept shards of prismatic rain, each droplet an impossibly sharp sliver that shredded leaf and armor alike. When silence fell, the ridges lay gouged into terraces of glass and void stone. Umarill's banner still stood, though none could verify whether its bearer lived, for haze of inverted brilliance obscured everything within spear cast. The survivors, halved in number, nerves clanging, retreated to their respective strongholds. Light commanders argued Umarill could not have withdrawn without sanctuary in Shadowlands. Shadow captains insisted his forces dispersed into light territories aided by traitor riddles. Trust, already brittle, flickered out. The armistice dissolved. City-state lifted blade against former ally, each convinced the other now harbored Dawnfire proponents. In Seyadain, the Radiant Guard declared martial regency, seizing shadow enclaves and forcing Dolly's practitioners into internment courts illuminated around the clock. In Ayleids, Covenant militias retaliated by plunging entire sectors into perpetual twilight, cutting aquifer pumps tied to Cyrodiil lines and leaving outer wards to thirst. Rural hamlets, caught between supply routes, endured rolling blackouts, sometimes literal, sometimes a deluge of blinding glare, their crops withering to white husks or stumbling through darkness, no dawn dispelled for days. Famine pressed upon the realm, and with it, fear stripped of philosophical veneer. Mannish uprising sparked at first along canal districts, where human barge hands understood sluice controls. A single night saw 3 welkynd storage barges seized, their cargo tossed into rivers more, so shards vanished beneath silt. The act crippled illumination grids of downstream workshops, yet even dark cities suffered. Shadow reservoirs relied on absorbed light to maintain pressure differentials. Thus began chaos not of tactic, but desperation. Light artificers found their resumes, smudged with cold sweat as factories dimmed. Shadow adepts endured Dolly's turbulence that gnawed at bone when no Cyrodiil infusion came to balance the ledger. Everywhere, systems built on polarity teetered now that neutral ground eroded. In these closing convulsions of the Corridor Age, a final convocation of remaining scholars assembled at the fissured courtyard below White Gold Tower, the sky above flickering between violet and amber. Present were light sages bearing cracked prism staves, shadow seers clutching void-fluted bells, and a handful of weary intermediaries pleading still for median path. The Mindarian's Convergence Codex, now verified by independent calculations, predicted the decisive alignment but days away. The Assembly debated whether to attempt dampening both parameters, dim Cyrodiil generators, open Dolly's vents to bleed excess into ether. Resources were scarce. Rival militias prowled nearby arcades. Yet the scholars resolved to try. Work crews, comprised of whichever hands volunteered, elf or man, light or shadow, descended into sub-tower conduits. There, they dismantled redundant lenses, ruptured clogged reservoirs to spill negative flux into sacrificial pits, and recalibrated harmonic veins using calibrant slivers cannibalized from Minserian ruins. For 3 restless nights they labored, songs of midnight liturgy mingling with rasp of saw on crystal. On the dawn preceding alignment, instruments still read perilous imbalance, though narrowed. Then an unexpected wind rattled the towers. Upper fins. News arrived that Umarill's legion, battered but unbroken, had encircled the outer wards. Scouts reported his war chanters intoning a single syllable, ad run, over and over, a compression of Elnefex, meaning return unto first light by way of final shadow. Starved defenders manned parapets, light archers shoulder to shoulder, with shadow hurlers, trusting each other no more than the foe below. Within the conduit depths, the scholar crew faced choice: flee to surface to fight, or complete recalibration in hope convergence might stabilize world regardless of battle's outcome. They chose the latter, sealing blast doors and singing the Luminous Requiem, an ancient hymn that merged Auriel's dawn canticle with Nocturnal's whisper of the fold. As sun-crested horizon, its disk half obscured by rolling storm of photic haze, white gold tower cast two shadows, one bright as polished bronze, one dark as deepest ink. Their outlines interleaved across plaza tiles like interlocking teeth, Cyrodiil kissing dollies in eerily perfect mesh. Instruments cried harmonic resonance. The convergence had begun. Above, Umarill raised his Dawnfire banner, unleashed a war shout that trembled glass windows 5 leagues distant, and charged. The chroniclers would later lament that no impartial eye survived to record precisely how light threads met shadow reservoirs, how Dawnfire collided with recalibration arrays, nor how tower keelstones weathered the blow. Testimonies conflict. Some recall a chorale of crystal voices rising to deafening crescendo. Others insist absolute silence reigned, while color drained from sky. There are tales of a third glow, neither white nor black, blooming like pale green pearl before imploding. When dust settled, those who stumbled through shattered colonnades discovered Umarill's sigil scorched into flagstones, yet bearer nowhere found. The tower's peak intact, though missing key capstone rings, their fragments fused seamlessly into base plinth as though melted down 100 meters, then flash-cooled. Whatever occurred, convergence resolved. Instruments, half destroyed, registered values returning to stasis, albeit along altered baseline few could fathom. Welkynd cores reignited across districts, but their radiance softer, tinted faintly lilac. Dolli's pools retained absorption, but now pulsed gently, as if heartbeat rather than hunger guided their cadence. It seemed light and shadow, forced through crucible of mutually assured ruin, emerged interlaced. The corridor no longer mirrored opposing walls. Instead, they melded into mosaic, each tile a sliver of dawn, each grout line trace of dusk. The war's momentum faltered. Fighters laid down weapons simply because their blades, tuned to divergence, no longer answered former call. Radiant halberds sparked unpredictably. Void bells rang dull. Hunger persisted. Cities lay wounded, yet impetus for annihilation ebbed like tide fleeing newly settled shore. In the uneasy hush, survivors from every creed gathered at ruined plaza. They found the scholar crew, the luminous requiem singers, collapsed, around master console, hands still intertwined in final chord. Not all alive, but those breathing gazed upon sky with eyes reflecting both sunrise peach and midnight cobalt. Their leader, Cyrodiil's grand descendant Ilithea, spoke only once. Balance is not stasis but orbit. Then her pulse ceased, leaving phrase to echo against cracked marble. Thus did the law of light and shadow culminate in convergence neither faction truly sought, yet none could deny. From this moment forward, the Heartland Elves would confront consequences woven not of singular radiance or lone abyss, but of interlocked gradients whose new equilibrium defied elder certainties. That reckoning, slow and inexorable, would shape decisions in seasons to come, decisions that would invite guests from north and west, set human hearts ablaze with hope of liberation, and test whether a civilization founded upon mastery of dawn could endure the long contested twilight arriving on silent wings. In the long hush that followed the tower's shuddering realignment, the Heartland drifted into a muted dawn, whose hues neither lawkeeper nor weather sage had ever charted. Soft lilac light suffused the shattered plazas, tinting marble colonnades with the gentle bloom of an orchid caught between bud and wilt. In that subtle luminance, the surviving Ayleids moved as if newly awakened from a vast, uneasy dream. They spoke quietly of the conquered shadow, a name given to the lingering resonance that now pulsed between welkynd and Vala matrices, knitting radiance and darkness into a single, measured cadence. Official edicts proclaimed a return to civic routine, but the realms could not slide so easily back into the rhythms that had once defined their confidence. Too much of the old cadence lay broken beneath those lilac beams, and the air itself seemed to carry the hush of withheld judgment. What remained unbroken, however, was the bond of dominion that chained man to Myr, a bond that the convergence had not loosened, only laid bare beneath a gentler dawn. Across the riverlands, columns of human labourers emerged from dormitory arches each morning exactly as they had for centuries. Their skin bore the pale gold sheen of Torlamp soot. Their shoulders carried the rhythm of endless lifting, stacking, hauling. Overseers still stood upon balconies of moon-filigreed stone, recording quota tallies in crystal tablets. If the overseers now wore faces lined by sleepless nights, and if their tone had softened with caution, the quotas themselves remained unchanged. Reconstruction of fractured infrastructure demanded bodies, and the Heartland aristocracy leaned upon those bodies with unspoken desperation. The harvest of light, though quieter, still fueled the Ayleid will to shape the world into mirrored perfection, and if the lilac glow shimmered less fiercely than the ancient azure blaze, that only meant more hands must labour to achieve the same purity. So, it was decreed. South of Lake Rumara, on the flats where rushes bent in wind, heavy with jungle perfume, rose the estate complex of Hendalish, pronounced Hendalek. By rights, Hendalish belonged to the House of the Emerald Ark, a lineage famed for producing photomancers of surpassing gentleness. Yet even gentle light could sear. Over 3 generations, Hendalek's fields had transformed into a labyrinth of glassroot irrigation troughs and crystalline seedbeds. Human workers, Nedis of the Pavoni tribes, Colovian driftfolk, and even a few Reach clan outcasts, performed the intricate maintenance of those beds, polishing crystal threads so that dawn's first beam might race unimpeded from horizon to lens. The work demanded touch so delicate that taloned Ayleid fingers too often fractured the thin strands. Thus the Myr excused themselves from toil, citing inefficiency, and doubled the human levy instead. Morning chants of Oriel still drifted from the high balconies, but below, where water and blood mingled in trench mud, other names began to be whispered in the softest syllables, names that stirred something older than the white gold itself. Among the workers marched a woman whom duty records list as Al-Ashtar. The ledgers of Hendalish spelled it Al-Eshtar, using lattice script that captured half the breath of her birth name and lost the rest. She was not yet called Alessia, nor did her eyes yet carry the ember that would ignite a rebellion, but the spark had begun to stir, flaring each dusk when she and her cohort gathered around guttering pitch lamps to share quiet songs. These were not the shrill battle tunes of Nordic sagas, nor the dirges of Colovian hill burials. They were slow, patient croons addressed to the beating of lungs and the warm press of soil. Some verses spoke of Kaina Reth, sky mother whose breath fills grain. Others mourned Shor, the missing god whose heart had been torn and hurled across the world so that mortals might know pain and hope in equal measure. To Ayleid ears, these hums sounded like the soft creaking of wooden yokes, of no account. To those who sang, they were the weaving of a seditious tapestry, though none dared name it so aloud. The Ayleid overseers monitored spiritual expression with varying diligence. In light-aligned districts, priests of Meridiar policed sacrificial altars. ensuring that no mannish rite dared invoke flame or water without elven sanction. In shadow-leaning courts, guardians of Nocturnal's Vale insisted that silence was a form of prayer and forbade communal utterance after dusk. Yet Hen Daedric, perched between factions and governed by the House of Emerald Ark's concept of benevolent distance, placed little weight on songs hummed in worker hovels. Their focus turned instead toward the Lilac Index, a new scale devised to calibrate light intensity post-convergence. Each morning, the Mistress of Crystal Labs adjusted lens angle increments, while her aides measured beam clarity against the index's etched shade bars. If readings dipped, the human shift extended by 1 hour. If readings rose, quotas grew likewise. Thus, the index, born of subtlety, ground the captives into precise exhaustion. Yet with each measured breath, they learned discipline, timing, and the value of shared endurance. News traveled slowly through vineyards of glass, but it traveled. From the east arrived rumors of a towering slave camp outside Tel Yenni, where a failed dollar's siphon burst and scoured 200 workers to bone, yet left elven supervisors untouched behind a prism shield. From the west drifted stories of shadow-infused fever creeping through the servant dormitories of Laia, killing infants within days, while Ayleid healers debated whether to allocate alchemical reserves to their rescue. Each atrocity hardened the whispered verses into firmer melody. When Alashtar crooned of pierced shore bleeding into river clay, listeners heard in his wound the image of their own scourged backs. When she chanted of Kai Nareth breathing gentle rain upon parched seed, they felt a stirring hope that mercy might descend upon flesh, not upon marble alone. Under lilac dawn, the Ayleids themselves suffered confusions of purpose. Light and shadow insisted upon truce, yet remained wary. Umaril's disappearance lay like a bruise upon every policy meeting. The Radiant Guard patrolled market arcades shoulder to shoulder with cloistered dark sentinels, each pretending camaraderie while measuring the other's footfall. Economic decrees demanded restabilization of trade routes, and so caravans again floated under river arches, yet half their cargo now comprised armor plate and repository crystals shrouded under tarps, new shipments to fortify cities should the truce fail. Within scholarly cloisters, some magisters argued for a shift toward pluralistic philosophy. If convergence had proved light and shadow inseparable, perhaps culture too must diversify. Others countered that union diluted excellence. They lobbied for stricter hierarchies, harsher quotas, and indoctrination schedules for mannish children, so that future labor would internalize obedience without need of whip. In stone courts tinted mauve by tower glare, arguments spun until voices frayed. Then they returned to their laboratories to transcribe treatises none would read outside their faction walls. The tower's new pulse influenced horticulture, glasscraft, even timekeeping. But to humans it offered only subtle reprieve. Welkynd, chambers glowed less fiercely, casting dormitories in gentler pastel rather than searing blue. Still the bells rang at dawn, still torches crackled along walkway parapets where freedmen could not tread. Yet the pastel hush gave space for certain thoughts to grow, thoughts of what might be possible if lilac dawn one day belonged to all. Among those who nurtured such imagination was a youth of sturdy shoulders named Belharza, pronounced Belharza. He hailed from the river shoals southeast of Ninendava and carried in his stride the calm of one who has known rivers' patience. Belharza listened to Al-Ashtar's songs with eyes half closed, committing each verse to memory. Sometimes he hummed counter-melodies in a rolling bass that steadied calloused fingers. When asked why he lent a voice, he answered only that water bears its own chorus. The river does not care who names it. Their fellowship deepened during the season of double rains, when convergence-born instabilities sent violent storms spiraling along the Niben. Lightning of amethyst hue struck terraces, shattering irrigation, troughs into jagged shards. Floodwaters swept through Daedric fields, drowning the seedlings whose glassy roots anchored the harvest cycle. With quotas threatened, overseers dissolved the usual caste boundaries, sending light-court scribes to haul sandbags alongside Daedric thralls. In that mingling, some elves flinched to discover humans as strong in arm, as keen in judgment. Others reacted with sharper cruelty, striking at the slightest pause. Al-Ashtar and Belharza led bucket chains, their voices steady above roar of wind. When a marble retaining wall buckled, they braced supports, saving elves who seconds before had wielded scepters upon their backs. Such gestures birthed among certain mer a disquieting gratitude. The mirror of dominion cracked when held against debt owed to slaves. Word of these rescues reached Varlacel's sub-council on agricultural phonometrics. A letter of commendation, etched upon thin silver leaf, arrived one dawn addressed to Al-Essia, worker forewoman. The scribe had shortened her ledger name out of haste. In that accidental truncation blossomed a new shape, Al-Esha, Alessia. The syllables rolled smoother on Merish tongues, yet to human ears it sounded like river reeds rattling in true wind. Alessia accepted neither commendation nor scolding. She tucked the silver leaf into a woven wristband and pondered power hidden within misnaming. A name given by another could wound, chain, or, if she willed, become the blade by which chains were severed. Night by night, clandestine gatherings expanded. Workers met beneath breach arches, where lilac gloom hid faces but carried sound. They spoke of histories told by captured reachmen, tales of Direni oppression, and of Nords who hurled down high rock citadels decades before. A Colovian stonemason recited fragments of the dragon cult's fall, describing how once pious villages rose against tyrant priests when hope burned hotter than fear. Such lore mingled with whispers of distant Atmora, where storms howled freedom's anthem. Though details blurred, the message pressed unyielding. Gods could bleed, towers could fall, thrones could crack. What the Lilac Age lacked was a spark. The spark arrived disguised as charity. Each winter solstice, the House of Emerald Ark hosted an offering rite known as the Lustral Dispensation. By tradition, overseers selected a single Daedric family whose compliance and output surpassed all ledger expectations, granting them access to the temple's inner courtyard for 3 nights' rest beneath thormic heaters. The event affirmed Ayleid benevolence while reminding others of rewards obedience could purchase. That year, priests chose the household of a middling labourer who brewed dye from river slimes, Alessia's adoptive uncle by circumstance rather than blood. At dusk, on the second night, lilac pulses rippled through the welkynd canopy, resonating oddly against the Vala dampeners now embedded in chapel walls. The hybrid pulse set temple glyphs flickering. In that deformation, a ward faltered, allowing mortal eyes to glimpse something hitherto concealed. The corridor beyond the inner sanctum, lined not with crystal, but with human skulls coated in electrum. Each cranium bore scorch holes where light siphons had drilled, leaving cavities black as charcoal. The family recoiled. Priests rushed forward, extinguishing lamps and erecting denial as swiftly as barrier spells. Yet reverence could not mend what revelation had undone. News of the skull corridor raced through slave bunkers faster than any overseer could muzzle. Not the existence of death, they knew that well, but the meticulous gilding of remains as trophies of craft. The meaning was clear. In Ayleid eyes, mannish essence served as raw material first, life second. Protest songs toughened into oaths, oaths sharpened into plots. Alessia and Belharza convened trusted speakers, a Reach witch daughter who had embroidered shadows into shawls, a Pavoni healer versed in marsh herbs, a Colovian wheelwright whose fingers could dismantle spin shafts blindfolded. They formed a circle of 9, Some later scrolls call them the First Revolt Council, each sworn to bear a fraction of Revolt's burden, so none could be isolated and broken. Among their first acts was forging a signal known as the Lilac Cry, 3 beats upon quarry stone, 2 slow inhalations, and a final hum pitched to the tower's new resonance. The cry could pass unremarked amid daily hammering, yet, to attuned ears, declare assembly night. While humans plotted, Ayleid high politics staggered toward fracture once more. The Shadow Covenant, weakened by internal distrust after Umaril's defeat, nonetheless sensed Light City's vulnerability. Supply lines remained choked by flood damage and slave absenteeism. Radiant Guard companies found themselves guarding grain shipments instead of city gates. Under guise of delivering reconstruction aid, shadow envoys infiltrated Hendalesh to study the Lilac Index arrays. Their secret goal was sabotage, hoping a collapse in light yield would humiliate light leadership. Yet within the estate, they encountered a reality far more volatile, humans singing hymns not to any elven or Daedric deity, but to intangible principles, compassion, endurance, unity. Such notions both fascinated and terrified the envoys. They returned to Ayleids bearing conflicting impressions. Here was a threat that undermined all Merish supremacy, yet perhaps also a force that could be harnessed against light dominance, if guided cleverly. The Covenant deliberated and opted for subtle manipulation. Agents posing as sympathetic overseers began spreading leaflets, thin crystal slivers inscribed with half-true prophecies that framed Kinareth and Stendar as secret aspects of Nocturnal, claiming liberation could arrive only through deeper devotion to Shadow. Alessia's council intercepted several slivers, reading them by gutter flame after curfew. They saw the bait. The council resolved to keep rebellion purely mannish, guided not by Merish patronage, but by the breath of those who laboured. Even so, rumours of shadow gifts fed anxieties among more fearful workers. In some barracks, fights erupted over what banner a revolt might raise. The council pacified quarrels by composing a new anthem, the Canticle of Earned Dawn, whose verses named no god outright but petitioned an unnamed father of breath and mother of grace to open shackles. Sung softly at shift's end, the canticle threaded through dormitories like balm, reminding listeners that freedom, once claimed, could wear any colour of sky. Weeks later, emissaries from the Archon Council arrived at Hendalesh to inspect lens repairs. Their retinue included a singular figure clad in half-light steel, Pelinal Whitestrake, Pelinal, a war captain of uncertain origin, rumoured to have slain a minotaur bare-handed near the Strid. Officially, Pelinal served as security consultant, contracted to identify weaknesses in estate defences. Unofficially, he sought information on Umaril's remnants and any trace of Dawnfire's lingering echo. Pelinal's presence electrified elven garrison commanders. Some revered him as embodiment of Auriel's wrath, others feared his reputed madness. To human workers, he looked at first glance like any other Ayleid warcast local, until they noted the way his pale eyes drifted beyond lens calibrations to track labourers' footsteps, how his scarred knuckles tightened whenever a whip cracked. On the second day of his inspection, Pelinal confronted an overseer who struck a youth for spilling vat solution. He seized the whip mid-air, crushed its plasmic filaments in his gauntlet until sparks died, and told the overseer, "Your lash angers whatever god keeps my heart from freezing." The overseer spat indictment of insubordination. Pelinal laughed, a sound like iron gates opening, and walked away without further word. From that moment, his legend threaded through bunkhouses faster even than the Skull Corridor tale. Alessia's council debated whether to trust Pelinal. Some argued he was a warhound of the same masters, unpredictable and lethal. Others saw in his defiance seeds of alliance. While they pondered, destiny forced decision. An accident, if accident it was, occurred in the lower crystal works. A Vala coupler overloaded, sending a black pulse through lattice channels that snuffed every lamp in the eastern dormitory queue. In pitch dark, panic erupted. Guards loosed arrows at phantom shapes. Civilians screamed. When lamps reignited, 3 Daedric children lay dead, pierced by elven bolts. Alessia, standing over one, lifeless form, felt a crack run through her voice as though convergence happened anew in her chest. She raised the child's limp hand and sang no lament, but a single piercing note that echoed against crystal ceilings. The lilac cry drifted beyond factory walls, carried by Vala resonance into every trench and tower cell. Somewhere on a balcony, Pelinal turned his helm toward that note, and his hand fell to the hilt of his silver filigreed sword. The revolt began not with grand banners, but with sabotage. Wheelwrights jammed lens gears with gravel. Marsh healers tainted ration vats with soporific herbs. Stonemasons loosened block keystones along aqueducts so that at a signal the water arches collapsed, flooding garrison storerooms. When dawn rose, Hendalik's quotas plummeted and overseers fumed, yet discipline frayed only slightly, until Pelinal chose a side. At midday, he strode into the central muster court, and without unsheathing blade, challenged the entire guard cohort to duel for right of discipline. Their captain refused, citing regulations. Pelinal struck him with gauntlet across jaw, breaking bone and protocol together. The cohort rushed. The courtyard exploded into melee. Worker lines scattered, then paused in stunned incredulity as Pelinal's sword brightened, some say with motes like stars, others with the glow of tower lilac, and carved arcs through elven mail. When dust settled, he stood alone amid fallen guards, visor flecked with violet luminescence. He looked toward workline throng and spoke simply. "Your chains are numbered. Break them before tally is done." That evening, the council met with Pelinal in a shadowed reed hut by riverbank. They found him seated on crate, helmet side, eyes rimmed by pink scar tissue, as though his gaze had stared too long into burning snow. He listened to their plea for alliance, for arms, for counsel. He answered with story, how he hailed from distant west where gods converse over battlefield thunder, how divine light sometimes coursed through his veins in bursts that scorched flesh, how he had hunted tyrant kings across seasons of wandering and saw in Ayleid dominion the same rot. Yet he warned revolt must be more than vengeance. Without structure and creed, humanity would trade one tyrant's whip for another's greed. Alessia replied that she sought not thrones, but balance, that man's breath should mingle with Myr's, where soil allows both root and foot. Pelinal laughed again, softly, and said he had heard such hope once from a dream of stars reflecting in red snow. He pledged sword to her cause, provided she bear the burden of shaping a realm gentler than the one she would destroy. Preparation quickened. Belhaza, whose river-flexed arms belied tactical mind, drilled labourers with stakes cut from reedwood, hardened by kiln ash. Reach witch-daughter Selene wove sigils of concealment across hidden cache pits. Pavoni herbalists brewed smoke orbs that ignited into choking lilac fog, masking charge formations, yet heralding revolt's colour. Throughout, Alessia walked the barracks, weaving words into hearts. She spoke of the lilac dawn not as Ayleid property nor divine accident, but as covenant, proof that when two forces, once opposed, found accord, a new light was born. If light and shadow could reconcile, why not elf and man? Some scoffed at dream-soft idealism, yet they followed her into training yards. For to labour without dream is to die, and dream, once given voice, can spark like flint. As moon of mid-year waned, the council judged readiness. A final message needed to fly beyond Hendalik, to Sayadine slave quarters, to Ninandava canal crews, to the shadow-cast dormitories of Laia. The revolt would ignite at next lilac dawn. Carriers too obvious would be caught. Instead they turned to the tower pulse. Selene and the wheelwright rigged a beacon lattice atop a disused kiln tower. At dawn's edge, they redirected convergence resonance through slotted Valar plates, carved with the 3-2-1 pattern of the lilac cry. The pulse rode ley lines invisible to Merish monitors, striking listening hearts across Cyrodiil with a tremor like a second heartbeat. In bunkers and cellars, captives woke, eyes widening with knowledge that the hour had arrived. Day of reckoning unfolded with deceptive serenity. Lens pylons warmed, overseers logged quotas. Then aqueduct valves exploded, dousing guard platforms. Smoke orbs burst, painting fields in hazy lavender. From the mist surged columns of workers armed with scythes, stakes, and broken crystal shards bound to wood. Pelinal led vanguard, his sword singing chords none had heard since convergence. Elven garrison, though trained, reeled under assault's ferocity. Many refused to strike lethal blows, reluctant to slaughter labor force they depended upon. Their hesitation cost them line integrity. By midday, estate keep fell. Alessia ascended balcony once reserved for quota announcements and proclaimed emancipation to all within earshot. Her voice, amplified by welkynd shard, she gripped as improvised. Focus rippled across canals. Slaves shed manacles and raised improvised banners dyed in lilac mud. Manacles cracked, lilac cloth cut into flame shapes. Yet victory at Hen Dalesh meant little if isolated. Radiant guard detachments from Sayarden mobilized to crush uprising. Alessia ordered evacuation into jungle, using storm-felled canals as channels of escape. Thousands fled along reed raft flotillas, guided by Belhaz's memory of river currents. Elven pursuit stalled amidst tangled debris. Along banks, freed. Workers sabotage signal obelisks, silencing status updates that might summon cavalry. Meanwhile, covenants in shadow regions watched with cautious intrigue. A blow against light power served their ambition, but rising Manish autonomy threatened Merish dominance altogether. Some shadow lords unleashed scouts to capture rebel leaders. Others leaked arms through black markets, hoping war would sap light's strength without toppling all elven rule. Through this tangle of motives, the resistance threaded, growing numbers and legend in equal measure. By early frost, Alessia's escaped host encamped in the Gerald foothills, near caverns where ancient Nedic pictographs lined basalt walls. There, she convened the first open council of freedmen and pledged to found a city where all breath is counted equal beneath the lilac sky. In those caves, her followers forged twin constellations of governance, the Circle of Compassion tasked with provision and healing led by marsh healers and reach witches, and the Spear of Dusk commanded by Belhaza, sworn to defend without oppression. Pelinal, restless, accepted no formal office. He roamed edge of camp, drilling warriors, vanishing for days to raid Ayleid outposts, reappearing with bleeding wounds that steamed under lilac moon. Some feared his fury, yet children trailed his steps, for he told stories of stars beating like drums within mortal ribs. Sayarden's Archon Council, receiving casualty tallies, demanded coordinated response. Light and shadow disputes ceased, in face of common threat. They issued joint proclamation. Every runaway must return within 12 nights, or families would be culled. They dispatched twin hosts, radiant phalanxes wielding prism shields and Dolly's magi bearing silence bells, to encircle Gerald camp. Alessia answered with envoy bearing single reed, woven into lilac knotwork. Its message read, "Lilac dawn belongs to hearts unshackled. Come, share its hue." The Archons interpreted this as insolence, yet some younger elves, recalling flood rescues and toned songs, hesitated. On march north, a radiant cohort mutinied, their captains citing unease at slaying unarmed families. They defected under night fog, joining Alessia's encampment. Their prisms became perimeters, focusing campfires into warm halos that warded frost. Thus the Heartland saw an unprecedented fracturing. Elves loyal to old order, elves swayed by conscience, humans once enslaved but now emboldened, and into that, Maelstrom still pulsed the tower's lilac resonance, reminding all that binaries had lost certainty. While armies poised, diplomats attempted final parley. They met at the ruined amphitheatre of Tyindar, site of Umaril's first demonstration. Alessia attended draped, not in armour, but in plain river-woven cloak, silver leaf of her misnamed commendation pinned over heart. Across marble dais stood Archon Saranwe, robes stitched in alternating gold and void thread, emblem of fragile unity. Dialogues began with ritual courtesy, yet soon spiraled. Alessia demanded abolition, representation, and sacred respect for all creeds. Saranwe insisted such upheaval imperiled civilization's glow. Each argument echoed deeper divide than words could bridge. When talks broke, both sides saw war as inevitable. Yet Cosmos, indifferent, prepared its own stroke. Observatories detected a starfall, another shard of Magnus slicing toward Heartland, brighter than any since Age of Towers. Calculations predicted impact within Niben Valley, near White Gold itself. Panic spread among Ayleid courts. They feared such shard, landing amid Tower's compromised foundation, might rend reality. Some proposed redirecting shard into Shadow Reservoir to cushion blow. Others suggested harnessing energy to purge rebellion in single flash. Rebel scouts overheard fragments of these debates and brought news to Alessia. She saw Omen. The shard would be either doom or deliverance, depending on who claimed its fire first. She summoned council, resolved to march. Night before march, Pelinal visited Alessia in Candleflicker Cavern. He knelt, placed before her his sword, hilt carved of meteoric glass, said to carry echo of a distant planet's death. He told her, blade would slay Ayleid kings, but might one day turn against man if wielded with hate. She replied that she carried not hate, but sorrow braided with resolve. Together they walked camp perimeter, listening to children sleep in lilac glow. Pelinal whispered that gods watched, some to cheer, some to wager. Alessia answered that mortal hands wrote truer scripture than any distant throne. At dawn, Spear of Dusk unfurled banners, a broken shackle over lilac sunrise silhouette. Wings of defected elves marched beside them, prism shields now etched with new sigil, the infinity knot, symbol of converged light and shadow. They advanced through river mist, meeting first skirmish at Shimmerwade ruins. Radiant lancers charged, but lilac fog swallowed beams, diffusing brilliance. Rebel lines bent, then tightened as defected prisms redirected light into angled cascades that blinded elven mounts. Belhaza led counterpush, scattering lancers. They pressed on, days blurring into siege lines, until spires of Sayadene glinted ahead. Yet starfall loomed imminent, its tail streaking turquoise across twilight. Archons convened within white gold spire, launching ritual to net stars, power. Array of welkynd lenses realigned. Valar reservoirs pulsed, and from tower's apex soared beam of lilac-tinged white, aimed skyward like questioning finger. Alessia's host saw beam flash and quickened pace, for they knew once shard entered. Tower grid, no mortal force might reclaim that flame. History remembers little of the battle beneath the shard's descent, for its light eclipsed all witness. Some claim Auriel himself turned face towards Cyrodiil. Others swear Shor guided shard with stump-bound hands. What is known, Pelinal surged ahead, carving swath through radiant guard. Dolly's bells shrieked, but shattered under converged resonance, as prisms and Vala plates collided in wild feedback. Alessia breached outer gate flanked by defected elves, who raised prism vault overhead. shielding civilians rushing after. At moment, shard pierced clouds, tower grid erupted, lilac light blossomed into blinding sphere, within which silhouettes froze, Ayleid battle mages raising staves, rebels lifting shields, Pelennor roaring challenge at Archon sorcerers. Then silence thundered. When sight returned, Shard's core lay embedded not in tower mouth, but in plaza stone where Alessia had first entered city as envoy. Its surface shimmered with both azure streaks and shadow ripple, convergence captured anew. Around it, Ayleid wards sputtered, drained. Pelennor strode to Shard, placed gauntlet upon cooling crust, and found it humming steady note, neither bright nor dark but chord of both. He looked to Alessia. She stepped forward, laid her palm atop his, felt pulse answer her heartbeat. At that touch, legends say Akatosh, Akatosh, dragon of time breathed a spark into mortal blood. The shard flared, branding palm-shaped glyph upon her hand. In that moment, lilac dawn lived within her flesh. White gold towers magistrates, sensing tide shift, fled into shadow corridors. Some defected, some chose ritual suicide within Vala crypts. Radiant and Covenant militias, deprived of grid, support, capitulated or scattered. Rebel hosts surged through city, dismantling sigil locks that barred humanity from plazas for so many centuries. Freed slaves flooded streets, singing canticle as torchlight danced on cracked mosaics. At Tower's base, Alessia gathered council. She declared chain law abolished, proclaimed birth of Heartland Confederacy where any creed might kneel, not in subservience, but to share bread and song. Elven defectors knelt by choice, offering craft to rebuild on equal terms. Pavoni healers tended wounded of both species. Reach witches planted seed stones among rubble, promising blossom by next spring. And far above, the lilac sky warmed to soft gold, as if acknowledging new axis of dawn. But conquest yields only doorway. Passage requires memory. Alessia vowed the skull corridor of Hendelek would stand untouched, a testament to cruelty undone. She sent envoys to Somerset, High Rock, Skyrim, inviting dialogue. She buried Pelennal's sword in vault beneath tower, at his request, lest its fury incinerate peace he had helped forge. Pelennal himself vanished into northern mists soon after, seeking a ghost of sorrow he seldom named. Belhaza remained, appointed protector of the frontier, tasked to guard new realm without repeating old shackles. Some scrolls claim Belhaza was Alessia's son by breath of Kinnereth and blood of Pelennor. Others, that he personified union of river and sky. Regardless, his calm steadied council chambers where hot words threatened to ignite. The lilac glow never faded entirely from tower stone. Scholars later theorized convergence set a second heart within white gold, one attuned not to dominion, but to chorus of equal breaths. Each dusk, prism walkway lamps ignited in toned sequence reminiscent of slave work songs, a gentle reminder. In repurposed refectories, elf and man taught each other alphabets, Elnifex loops mirrored by Colovian runes, reach knots twined with mage script. Marsh healers introduced river herbs to Ayleid alchemists, seeking curatives beyond lightcraft. Slowly, suspicion thinned. Not vanished, scars endure, but thinned enough that when spring arrived, children of both bloods chased firefly motes across courtyards where once they hauled crystal ore. Outside Heartland, other forces stirred. Nord Jarls eyed southward, Kothringi traders sailed upriver. Daedric cults plotted vengeance for shrines raised. Yet within lilac dawn, a seed of concord took root, breaking stone just wide enough to let breath in. Alessia, bearing palm glyph, convened artisans atop tower summit to breathe silent vow that no law would again bind voice or dream within these walls. Some say a dragon shadow wheeled overhead, its outline caught between gold and purple. Blessing, vow with beat of eternity's wing. Others hear nothing but wind. Either truth finds home inside stone hearts of those who remember. So the spark, struck in muddy trench under glass root lens, became flame that licked marble grandeur and tempered it into kinder glow. Chains shattered, names reclaimed, dawn earned, not handed. In years to follow, chroniclers would title Ayleids the slave queen, then first empress, then saint beyond mortal failing. Yet in quiet moments, when lilac haze settles, over Lake Rumar and reed warblers hush their song, the earth recalls simpler syllables. Aleshtar, breath between beats, river reeds in wind, and it is said the tower hums back, low, steady, holding convergence within every grain, to remind all who pass beneath its arches that balance, once won, is not gift, but task, renewed each dawn we choose to stand unshackled beneath sky tinted by courage and tempered by memory. Legends claim the lilac dawn lingered for 14 uninterrupted days after Ayleids' proclamation, time measured not by sundials, but by hushed astonishment that the sky itself appeared to honor her vow. Along the Nibben's mirror-bright currents, barges once laden with crystal tribute now ferried relief grain, their decks patrolled by mixed cohorts of liberated man and defected myrrh. The vessels traveled cautiously. Outside the Heartlands, nascent peace, entire swaths of Cyrodiil still echoed with the broken cadence of light shadow partisans who rejected the concord. Many Ayleid lords gathered retinues in secluded strongholds, convinced that Ayleids' reforms heralded ruin. Yet within the tower's lilac glow, daily life tempered toward fragile equilibrium. Pelinal Whitestrake did not remain to save a newfound calm. On the 9th night of peace, he slipped from White Gold's western gate, leaving behind neither letter nor counsel. Some guards swore they saw him stride south toward the shimmering valleys of Nin and Ava. Others insisted he ascended tower terraces and vanished in coruscating arcs of white gold heat. Whatever the truth, rumors of his reappearance spread swiftly, always at the fringes of rebellion. A radiant figure who burst through Dunmolag's moonlit ramparts. A pale knight who shattered Valar spheres in the diabolic vaults of Maladar. A wrathful shadow who dragged Ayleid captains screaming into river shallows only to let currents decide their fate. Where Pelinal walked, dawnfire and dire lament followed. Ayleids grieved the departure, but did not pursue. Governance demanded vigilance, for even sympathetic elves required reassurance that their crafts and lands would not dissolve beneath the weight of human desire. She convened the Synod of Lilac Accord, 6 human councillors representing each freed tribal lineage, and 6 elven envoys chosen from defected houses. At her insistence, the 7th seat was left unfilled, an empty stone chair beside her own, carved with interlocked rays and eclipse crescents to remind all that absence too has voice. Belhaza presided over council protocols, his measured, cadence evoking river roll rather than gavel crack. Their first decree abolished hereditary bondage, yet affirmed rights of property-holding elves, provided no life be sold or maimed. Their second allocated tower tax revenues for communal aqueduct and road repair. Their third ordained that every shrine, Aedra or Daedra, light or shadow, must register rites publicly so none could flourish in secret torment again. Such statutes seemed improbable achievements mere seasons prior, yet parchment alone cannot bind fear. Beyond Rumare's reed-fringed expanse, in the deeper tangles of the Heartland jungles, resistance took darker hue. Fleeing Ayleid nobility, some light, some shadow, most neither, retreated to hidden sanctuaries. The alabaster vaults of Cyrodiil, the mist-enshrouded terraces of Vala Neon, the vine-draped necropoli of Yanawar. There they nursed wounded, pride, forging pacts with Daedric emissaries who whispered that Alessia's creed weakened the Merish spark. In the midnight dells of Cyrodiil, they convened a secret parliament, later styled the Circle of Ver-Inil, vow-bound to reclaim white gold, or raise it to dust. Leading this shadowed coalition was King Glynvarel of Cyrodiil. Glynvarel, a statesman once celebrated for radiant scholarship, now driven by grievance into cold command. Glynvarel sent envoys north to Skyrim, offering rich loot of Ayleid reliquaries in exchange for Nordic blades. The Nords, long restless after their victory over the dragon cult, weighed offer against memories of elven arrogance. Ultimately, avarice prevailed. Jarls of the Pale dispatched warbands south through the Gerals, each host hungry for silvered, crystal fame. As mead-steeped berserkers marched under serpent-mast banners, Glynvarel's courtiers prepared Citadel for joint offensive. Their strategy hinged on swiftness. Seize the white gold tower before Alessia's confederacy could fuse alliances, then impose treaty favourable to Merish rule under Nordic regency. A puppet arrangement, preserving Ayleid aristocracy behind brute, human muscle. Alessia's scouts caught wind of the alliance when a Reachman trader returned from Coral with tales of frost-hammered columns trudging along Orange Road. The synod erupted into debate. Some councillors argued for immediate diplomatic overture to Nordic jarls, appealing to shared hatred of elven tyranny. Others demanded raising levy armies to fortify passes. Alessia listened, brow furrowed, before addressing assembly in calm tones. We shall fight only to preserve breath, never to glorify triumph. Yet we will fight. Her plan unfolded with riverine elegance. She dispatched envoys to High Rock, beseeching Direni magisters for neutrality pledges. She released captured Radiant Guard officers, sending them to Lindenol, with letters promising safe haven for any city that renounced the Circle. And she summoned Pellinol, carving his name into the tower's harmonics. 3. Tolls of the mid-spire bells, each spaced exactly one heartbeat longer than the last. Answer arrived not in person, but in omen. On the eve of mid-year, a crimson comet burned across zenith, shedding sparks that hissed into Lake Rumare like arrowheads. Priests muttered of Shezar's wrath. Astronomers catalogued trajectory. Alessia understood. Pellinal had offered sign he fought elsewhere along the Circle's path, thinning their ranks. Buoyed, she mustered her volunteers, Heartland farmers, canal stevedores, stonemasons, prism-trained elves who refused bondage nostalgia. They lacked heavy plate, yet artisans fused bronze with tempered welkynd scrap to craft mail that shimmered lilac at dawn. Belhaza drilled spear walls on the floodplains. Reach witches etched ward sigils into shield edges. Pavoni herbalists brewed adrenal drafts from marsh mint. The first clash erupted at Latin Tor, a watchfort overlooking Silver Road. Nordic vanguard, expecting soft resistance, slammed against interlaced shield and spear. Belhaza directed counter-phalanx maneuvers with river flow grace, allowing enemy momentum to overextend, then folding outer ranks inward. By dusk, Nord axes lay in heaps among trampled hyacinth. Survivors fled north, their mead bravado quenched. Captured jarls were shown no cruelty, only the skull corridor of Hendalesh, preserved as witness. Some wept, others cursed elven allies whose promises of easy prey had lured them south. Alessia pardoned them upon oath never to bear blade against confederacy. Many accepted, returning home with stories that tempered Skyrim's appetite for Ayleid gold. Glynvarel, incensed by Nordic rout, unleashed Plan B, strike dread into human heart by resurrecting a relic of Merish sorcery lost since antediluvian days, the Wrathspring engine. Hidden beneath Sayadin's deepest crypt sat a sphere of fused Varla and meteoric iron, carved with spirals meant to siphon fear from living minds and convert it into searing photomantic discharge. When activated, it would project a belt of annihilation capable of erasing entire regiments. His magi labored night and day, coaxing lilac tinge into lethal white. Yet the engine required a catalyst, a sentient soul willingly sacrificed beneath its core. Lacking volunteers, Glinvarel decreed one of the rebel prisoners suitable. Fate delivered to his dungeon a Nord skald captured after Latin Tor, Styr Bjorn Tun Sile. The skald defied torment, singing ballads until his voice cracked. On the night scheduled for ritual, thunder rang from beneath citadel foundations. The dungeon burst open under assault by single figure clad in shattered light. Pelinal, witnesses, later described the rescue as like watching dawn torn to shreds by its own radiance. Pelinal carved through column after column of Vala armored guards, each stroke of his blade matched by echo of monastic bells far above. The Wrathspring engine, half-primed, trembled under stray arcs, its reservoir sloshing molten glow. Pelinal shattered sphere housing, releasing energies that surged along conduits and backlashed into cubic volumes of empty stone. Sayyadin's lower vaults collapsed in implosion of inverted fire. Above, towers cracked, expelling shards like thunderhail. Pelinal fled with Styrbjorn over his shoulder, leaving Glinvarel's magi to perish beneath their own creation. By dawn, Sayyadin smouldered, its alabaster spires drooping like wax under new sun. The Synod seized this victory, drafting proclamation known as the Mercy Writ. It invited any Ayleid city to integrate peacefully, retaining local autonomy under Confederate law. Accepting towns would dismantle slave creches, convert welkynd for public illumination rather than oppression, and seat emissary in Lilac Council. Many houses considered, Nenalata, Nin Endava, and Vala Neon deliberated. Yet before decisions matured, the circle counterstruck, this time targeting the heart of Alessia's legitimacy. 3 nights after Sayyadin's fall, assassins cloaked in unlight infiltrated White Gold's garden tiers. They isolated Alessia outside Chapel of Mixed Shrines, blades dipped in poison derived from Dolly's silts. But as they closed, tower crystals hummed unnatural pitch. Lilac lamps flared and coalesced into silhouette of Pelinal, though he was leagues distant. The light echo felled 2 assassins with spectral blow. The rest fled into hedge mazes where defected Ayleid guards hunted them down. In aftermath, priests discerned that Tower's post-convergence heart had attuned to Alessia's life pulse, manifesting protective resonance. Rumor spread. The Empress carried the Tower in her blood. Strike her, and creation would roar. Symbolic power soon took corporeal shape. In deepest cellar of White Gold, artisans collaborated with Dureni enchanters, who had decided neutrality served them best to fashion vessel for Tower blood resonance, a torque shaped from red gold flecked with lilac motes. At consecration ceremony, Alessia clasped torque around throat. It settled as if alive, pulses syncing with hers. A Dureni named Callion Lay murmured it resembled ancient phylactery designs meant to anchor dragonfire within mortal flesh. The idea frightened yet enthralled the Synod. Callion Lay proposed forging true covenant with time dragon Akatosh to safeguard realm against Daedric incursion, using torque as focus. Debate split council. Some feared angering gods, others yearned for protection unswayed by moral fickleness of men and mare. Alessia pondered quietly, then dispatched Callion Lay and Belhaza to High Hrothgar, hoping the greybeards of Skyrim might counsel restraint or path forward. While envoys journeyed north, war flared in south. King Glinvarel, wounded yet undeterred, consolidated surviving forces at Nin Endavar. There he invoked pact with Meridia, pronounced Mehridia, offering bound souls of his loyal nobles in exchange for luminous legion. The Daedric prince obliged, imbuing Vala-gilded constructs with fragments of prismatic will. These Aurorans, bodies like molten glass armored in gold wire, marched beneath banners bearing Meridia's comet sigil. Their charge: sever Lilac Confederacy. At knees, reclaim white gold, and erect new dawn untainted by shadowed compromise. Alessia's scouts watched in dread as Auroran columns surged north along Cercen tributary, crossing luminous bridges conjured from refracted moonbeam. She mustered levies, yet these foe were unlike mortal armies. They bled light, not blood. Their swords sliced through bronze as sun through mist. Early skirmish at Fort Varian ended in rebel rout. Bastion walls melted under Aurora lances. Desperate, Alessia recalled Pelinal. She rode alone to ruined amphitheatre of Tai Indar, knelt where Umaril's sigil still scarred stone, and whispered Pelinal's birth name, Stu Inashu in ancient tongue, into the wind. Pelinal answered by threshold of second battle, materializing from shimmer of dust as Aurorans clashed with Confederate spears outside Ninendava's old orchard. He gazed upon crystal giants and laughed, a sound edged with grief, for he recognized Meridia's craft, light enslaved to pride. Drawing his meteoric blade, he surged into fray, each stroke releasing thundercrack that shattered Auroran plating. Yet every fallen construct erupted into starburst shards, showering battlefield with razored fragments. Human ranks faltered under stinging hail. Pelinal howled for retreat and faced Glinvarel alone beyond orchard gates. Their duel raged amid drifting lilac ash. King's sunbound glaive versus Pelinal's night-scarred sword. Accounts diverge on precise sequence, but consensus holds Pelinal struck fatal blow, severing Glinvarel's right arm at shoulder. In dying breath, King whispered curse. Meridia would reclaim her stolen dawn, and Pelinal would drown in uncreated light. At that utterance, collapsed vaults of Ninendavar erupted as hidden Vala reactors detonated, enveloping duelists in ring of unmaking. Conflicted reports claim Pelinal vanished amid flare, body consumed, armor left smoldering. Others insist he rose charred and wordless, wandering into mists. Regardless, battlefield fell silent save hush of lilac snow settling upon severed glaive. News of Glinvarel's fall, fractured circle of Ver Inil. With central command broken, lesser lords quarreled over succession. Some sued Alessia for mercy, under terms of writ. Others entrenched behind necropolis walls, praying for Daedric salvation that never came. Auroran remnants, absent controlling magicka, dissolved into dusk motes drifting upriver until winking out. Rebel spirits lifted yet mourned Pelinal, hero, demon, or both, whose fury shielded them one last time. Alessia conducted vigil at orchard ruins, burying blackened fragments of his blade beneath willow cuttings. She sang canticle of earned dawn until dawn bled from lilac to rose. With battlefield calm, Belhaza and Calion Lay returned from High Hrothgar bearing revelation. The Greybeards, having meditated on Alessia's plea, confirmed that Dragon Akatosh could bind illusion and truth into joint covenant if given anchor of mortal blood willingly offered. The priest taught Thuum phrase, Andre come, dremtid, in mortal peace, time holds. Calion Lay shaped dragon words into runic filaments, forging them into Torca's lattice. Ceremony commenced at Tower Summit. Alessia stood, barefoot upon white gold plate, attendants chanting both Merish Dawn hymn and Manish seed song, merging languages as convergence merged light. She pressed blade across palm, one final cut, and let blood bead upon talk, mingling with lilac glow. In that instant, sky dimmed. Silent dragon shadow coiled around sun, breeze stilled. Then golden light flared through talk, twisting into shimmer invisible yet felt, like heartbeat thrumming outwards across realm. Mountain seers later wrote, they heard echo of great wingbeat. Marsh children swore river shifted course before settling anew. Thus was covenant forged. The talk, soon dubbed Amulet of Kings, anchored Alessia's line to dragonfires. so long. As descendant of her blood wore it and kept dragonfires lit within Temple of One, Daedric princes could not freely stride Nirn. This pact, though esoteric, lent tangible weight to Confederacy's law. Cities that once hesitated now swore fealty, valuing peace of mind over pride. Nin Endava, laid bare by reactor blast, accepted reconstruction under joint council. Vala Neon surrendered Vala vaults, converting them into public archives. Nenalata alone resisted, claiming genealogical primacy older than Tower itself. But after months of siege by Belhazar's regiment and internal coup by reformist elves, even its gates opened in capitulation. Alessia's realm no longer resembled uprising camp of Gerald Caves. Cobblestone causeways radiated from white gold, like spokes, connecting market towns rebuilt with bricks of mixed clay and photomantic mortar. Scribes codified lilac laws into smooth-flow script designed for both Elnefex quill and Colovian charcoal. Guild halls taught freed humans crystal, lathing, while elves learned crop rotation from Nedic plough-masters. Not all frictions vanished. Brawls ignited over ruined shrines, and some light purists fled to Valenwood rather than witness Vala converted into humble street lamps. But foundational violence receded, replaced by civic discourse moderated beneath banner depicting boundless, horizon-tinted purple rose. Yet Alessia herself felt weight of covenant settle upon bones. Each dawn, she woke sensing Tower heartbeat within chest. Each pulse reminding her peace hung always upon mortal thread. She appointed Belhazar as co-regent, empowering him to adjudicate disputes, and convened annual council wherein any citizen rode to Rumar to speak grievance. Chroniclers call this assembly the Dusk Hearing, for sessions began at sunset, so lilac lamps framed each petition in equality of glow. Among earliest grievances came plea from Nord settlers whose kin were abducted by remnant Ayleid warlock in bleached ruins near Cyrodiil. Alessia dispatched joint militia, recovered prisoners, and offered warlock choice of trial or exile beyond Geral's, act praised by some as mercy, condemned by others as weakness. In final years of her reign, distant storms stirred once more. Word reached White Gold of Dunmer, ascendancy in Resdain, of Dwemer tonal experiments shaking Red Mountain's roots, of Colovian chieftains whispering about independence. Alessia's health waned. Talker's glow dimmed as if mirroring sighing heart. On twilight of her passing, priests lit dragonfires. Flame flickered between lilac and gold, then steadied. Belhazar accepted amulet. Its pulse chimed different, river low, deliberate. People gathered in plaza felt transition as shift in wind. No violent rupture, only continuation, as if realm itself had learned lesson of balance. Alessia's body was interred not beneath tower, but in cavern where slave council first vowed rebellion. Tomb walls bore carvings showing convergence swirl, light and shadow locked in eternal dance. And below, the simple reed wristband she once wore, silver commendation leaf still tucked within. Upon stone, sarcophagus artisans etched her manifold names: Al-Eshtar, Alessia, Paravant, First Empress, Slave Queen, Mother of Lilac Dawn. They left blank space beside, awaiting titles future ages might bestow, for story was not ended, only opened outward, like petals of dawn unfurling across sky, shared by every breathing soul. In generations to follow, chroniclers would mythologize battles, magnify miracles, debate Pelinal's divinity, question why some Ayleids vanished into obscurity while others merged into nascent Imperials. Yet beneath scholarship and legend, one truth stood firm. Alessia transformed conquest into covenant, sculpting peace not from erasure of foes, but from tempering of blade and law alike. Her lilac dawn endured in every lantern lit for scholar, pouring over rune, in every lullaby hummed in mixed blood household, In each act of mercy wrested from impulse toward vengeance. And though towers pulse would later falter, though empires rise and fall, echoes of that heartbeat remain, whispering through corridors of time that when light and shadow converge in willing hearts, even gods must lean close to witness spark, made flesh, made song, made dawn unchained. The riverlands of Cyrodiil, once a blazing skein of crystal pathways and sky-piercing towers, settled into a quieter course after Belhaza donned the amulet and the dragonfires rose again. Yet silence is seldom stillness. Beneath the lingering lilac haze, currents of loss and longing wound their way through marish hearts. Freedmen ploughed fields where welkynd canals had run, and mixed courts drafted charters in the tower's shadow. But out among the vine-choked marches and in the hollows of shattered citadels, pockets of the old Ayleid order clung to memory with blades honed on regret. Their struggle was no longer one of dominion. It had become a question of survival, of finding breath between the widening ribs of a vanishing world. Southwest of Rumar, where jungle knotted into a dark green wall, and the Niben split into finger-thin streams, stood the ruined precincts of Abergalas, pronounced Abergalas, once a seat of void oblation devoted to Molag Bal. Alessian patrols avoided the place. Clergy whispered that Vala stones there still pulsed with inverted liturgies, and that shades of sacrificial captives prowled crypt naves, clutching chains of half-light. Into these forbidden halls retreated a circle of high-blood survivors, led by Queen Eranwe, the Ash-Tide. Her cousin Glinvarel lay buried beneath Ninendava's orchard. Her ancestral estates had burned, yet Eranwe would not bend knee to the Lilac Council. She gathered artisans who still remembered the syntax of sorrows, the rites that bound Daedric promise to meteoric iron, and vowed to forge a weapon that could reverse the Concord's binding on time itself. Their refuge was no palace. Vines, split alabaster staircases, moondark slime crept through fresco joints. The great font where once the blood of Cold Harbour pooled now lay dry, its argent channels clogged by centuries of dust. Yet under Eranwe's direction, Abergalas breathed again. Craft halls rang with the measured clang of glass-edged chisels. Vala kilns flared pale and hungry, and deep beneath the basilica, where the catacombs opened into basalt caverns, the Queen's thaumaturges cut spiral trenches to anchor a new lattice, a mirror engine meant to echo and invert the dragonfire's ward. For catalyst, they required living lineage of Alessia's blood, willingly spilled. Failing that, they sought a shard of the amulet's resonance, a lock of Imperial hair, a flake of Torque gold, anything that carried the dragon's signed breath. Their spies filtered through Rumar's docks disguised as fishmongers and scripture peddlers, listening for mention of court laundries or careless pages. None returned. While Abergalas sharpened its secret knife, other exiles sought gentler harbours. High on the western fringe, where Colovian hills tumble toward Valenwood's knotted canopies, rose the moss-bright terraces of Anutwil, a city neither wholly Ayleid nor yet Bosmer. There, the last prince of Moonglass, Arundoril, bartered words rather than steel. He had watched his own opalescent domes collapse under Alessian ballistae, had led his people through cedar passes into the green, and had stood astonished when the Bosmer tribes parted bracken to greet them without arrow nor jest. The wild hunt lay dormant in those years. The compact with Yifra held firm. Still, the Wood Elves distrusted stone and crystal, so Arundoril bargained. His folk would abandon their meteoric glass, take only what songs they could carry, and weave their art into living timber. In return, the Bosmer granted sanctuary beneath Eldergrat oaks. Such was the birth of Anutwil, its dwellings curled like nautilus shells along giant branches, its corridors scented with sap and starlight. Ayleid runes faded into bark. Merish eyes learned to follow Green Pact etiquette, and though tongues remained distinct, they discovered shared reverence for luminous insects and windborne choir evenings. For a time, exile felt less like wound, more like graft, old root taking hold in new soil. To the north, secrecy was rarer. The Alessian order had not yet metastasized into the theocratic juggernaut of later centuries, but its ardor grew restless under Belhazar's moderate gaze. Monks in ivory cowls roamed outlying villages reciting canticles that condemned Daedra, myrrh, and any thought smacking of arcane excess. They preached that the slave queen's bargain with dragons was but half salvation. True deliverance required casting down every last tower of Merish hubris. Belhazar's prefects curtailed their harsher penances, yet the sermons sowed suspicion. Mixed-blood households found doors defaced with glyphs of severance. Elven vintners saw presses smashed. Rune schools closed when magistrates ruled that curvilinear glyphs tempted children toward godless geometry. Such zeal pushed many moderate elves, those who had embraced the lilac peace, into uneasy silence, and it stiffened the resolve of radicals still at large. Each edict, each bonfire of confiscated scrolls, rang like distant hammer for Queen Aranwe, shaping purpose in Abigalis' dark forge. Within the tower, Belhazar convened scholars to chart these tremors. The Grey Loom, once an Undercroft fellowship of charmsmiths, had matured into official bureau of omen and memory, tasked with monitoring ley flux and social hum. Their archivists mapped every riot spark, every pilgrim road, and every unexpected fluctuation in dragonfire. What they saw troubled them. Pulses of ward flame dipped whenever Alessian flagellants held mass burnings of Daedric relics. The pyres seemed to siphon some portion of cosmic tension, bending ward resonance like wind-luffing sailcloth. Master, cartographer Anebre predicted that a concerted purge of enough relics in one span could tear micro-fissures in the barrier, granting Daedric will a whisper-thin corridor. He presented findings to Belhazar, whose brow knotted as if the dragon talk tightened. The Protector forbade further unsanctioned relic fires and granted amnesty to moderate Merish shrines, hoping balance would hold. Yet his decree outran his reach. Hills teemed with fervor few prefect lictors dared confront. One of those relic bonfires lit the sky near Cyrodiil. Flames licked 70 cubits high, fueled by Vala tablets hissed from contraband crypt. Atop a wooden scaffold stood Father Barras of the Alessian Outer Watch, chanting the 15th exegesis, that all mortal sorcery was lie, and shackles none but Auriel's pure light could unlock. Pilgrims wept, feeding scrolls to the inferno. When the blaze peaked, stars overhead dimmed as though film swept across heavens. Grey Loom augurs felt ward pulse stutter. Within Abigalis, Queen Aranwe's thaumaturgus sensed fracture they could slip a needle through. They redoubled incantations, threading mirror engine with blood ink sigils distilled from their own wrists. Without a Lessian crusade, they told themselves, the barrier would hold. With it, a door now cracked, and they could throw it wide. But a weapon is useless without battlefield. Aranwe sought alliance with Nenahlata, the last Heartland city still ringed by Unbroken. Walls of white gold, Nenahlata owed nominal fealty to Lilac Council, yet resisted all edicts curbing private slave ownership. Its king, Lal Lorcar, had grown skilled at bribing prefects and promising grain shipments that never quite arrived. In return, the council allowed him token autonomy, hoping slow persuasion would reform his court. Aranwe saw advantage. Nenahlata's proximity to Rumara offered staging ground. Its greed made it pliant. She sent envoy bearing shard of extinct dawnfire sealed in obsidian file, proof of power her forge could renew. Lal Lorcar received gift beneath moonlit loggia, held it to torchlight, watched the shard pulse like molten ruby. His courtiers urged caution, but the king heard only promise of leverage over the council, perhaps even chance to crown himself High Archon of a reborn Merish League. He swore secret pact. Nenalata would host Iranwi's mirror engine once complete, house her refugees, and provide sacrificial reagents in exchange for first right to the weapon's boon. Transporting the unstable lattice from Abergalis to Nenalata required subterfuge. River routes bustled with prefect checkpoints. Skies rippled with griffin riders loyal to Belhaza. The exiles chose a path through the old underjunctions, tunnels dug during earliest Aldmeri expeditions, now half flooded and crawling with glow leeches. 5 convoys of crystal coffers set out, each 10 leagues apart, guided by shadow augurs, whose eyes had been treated with inverse glyph salve to pierce darkness. 2 convoys perished when floodgates collapsed. 1 was seized by Bosma wardens and vanished into Green Pact legend. The 4th reached Nenalata battered but whole. The 5th, carrying prime resonator coil, surfaced prematurely near a hamlet loyal to Lilac. Villagers reported sighting of pale carts and muttered syllables like Ashtide. Word reached Tower, and Belhaza ordered discreet pursuit. Thus, the race began. Could council investigators confirm Lattice's nature before Iranwi's engineers aligned its heart with Dragonfire's scar? At this juncture stepped forth a figure seldom sung in ballad, but inscribed in council archives. Jennifer of the Eventide, a Bosma Ayleid scribe, fostered in Anatwil, yet sworn to Lilac law. Small of stature, hair bound in bark cloth, she heard of mirror engine rumours and volunteered for envoy to Nenalata. Her mixed blood granted some hope of parley. Her vow to Green Pact meant she refused consumption of stone-grown foods, a gesture Lal Lorcar's etiquette circles might respect. Belhaza approved, dispatching her with slim guard of river rangers and sealed charter offering debt forgiveness if Nenalata surrendered contraband. Jennifer reached city gates beneath banners of truce, only to find ramparts bristling, torchlight tinted crimson by Dawnfire shard luminescence. King Lal Lorcar granted audience in Hall of Silent Echoes, a broad chamber whose walls diffused voices so words returned a half-beat later, rendering discourse uneasy. He listened to charter, accepted token of lilac grain, and smiled as if humouring field mouse lecturing owl. Then he declined, citing ancestral sovereignty. Jennifer requested tour of public shrines. Lal Lorcar obliged, weaving path that revealed little yet allowed envoy glimpse of coffers stacked near Moonfall dais. Within, she saw mirrored slabs flecked with blackening welds, the mirror engine, alive with inchoate glow. She memorized layout, smuggled sketches into reed scroll, sewed it to sash, and departed claiming need for council consultation. She never reached Rumar. On river crossing, her skiff was intercepted by masked riders wearing sigil of a based sun, a relic mark of Umaril's lost legion. They burned dispatches, cut down rangers, and dragged Jennifer to Abergalis. Queen Iranwi greeted her in nave lined with inverted chandeliers, lightless crystals dripping wax of coagulated starlight. The queen offered choice: join exiles and witness restoration of Merish ascendance, or feed mirror engine heart. Jennifer answered in blended Old Mary and Bosma dialect. I serve dawn that nourishes root and wing alike. For defiance, Iranwi decreed her heart would anchor Lattice, satisfying need for Alessian bloodline proxy. Bosma sap shared kinship with Aedra. As men did, she argued. Combined with half Ayleid vein, it might suffice. Yet Iranwi misjudged strength of Green Pact. When Jennifer's scream echoed through catacombs, the Grat oaks of Anatwil shuddered. Sap coursed irregular. Root whispers carried truth to Bosma wardens who had once escorted refugees. They petitioned Yfre, and elders cast bones, reading omen of blood-crossing grain unbroken. That night, a slender column of Bosmer, hunters slipped into Abergalis, guided by glowmoths drawn to Jennifer's life odor. They sprang ambush, blades carved from bone of bone, severing sigil wires, toppling Vala flasks. Blasts of shadowed light cracked Basilica Dome. Iranwi fled beneath raining shards, her left arm scorched. Hunters lifted Jennifer, barely alive, and bore her into the green. There she healed, but her heart had brushed lattice core, slipping fragments of mirror logic nested within her pulse. Dreams of inverted dawn plagued her sleep. She transcribed them onto bark scrolls, burying words under marked saplings, hoping some future attentive to balance would decode warnings. Iranwe, now maimed and enraged, abandoned subtlety. She summoned Nenalata's engineers to Abergalis, ordering accelerated completion. Lal Lorcar objected, fearing exposure. She threatened to shatter Shard File, unleashing Dawnfire within his court. Terrified, he deployed slave crews deeper into catacombs, though shortages forced him to raid neighboring hamlets, re-enslaving humans he had once promised freedom. Alessian prefects noticed disappearances. Belhaza dispatched investigative cohort, led by Captain Salvius Vero. Salvius, veteran of Latin Tor, trained in both prison warfare and diplomacy. Vero tracked slave wagon ruts to Nenalata's east gate and requested entry. Lal Lorcar denied, citing plague quarantine. Vero set camp, pledged not to breach treaty, yet each dawn counted new funerary smokes curling from city vents. While stalemate festered, the Alessian order made its own move. High Sacerdote Halvinius, a man of razor words and knotted spine, rode into Vero's camp with 200 bright robes at heel. He presented sealed bull demanding city's immediate purgation, citing proof of Daedric forging. Vero, bound by Belhaza's measured doctrine, refused, insisting negotiation might yet quell danger. Halvinius deemed this heresy. Night that followed, bright robes infiltrated Nenalata through forgotten culverts, slaughtering guard posts before raising blazing Verl banners, sigils of cleansing flame. Chaos erupted. Iranwi interpreted incursion as Imperial assault. She activated mirror engine prematurely. Coffers split, lattice sang with chimes of falling glass. Energies meant to channel inverted dragonfire bled into catacomb air. Resulting, surge blasted through bedrock, hurling towers skyward like tossed javelins of cracked marble. In camp, Vero saw horizon turn white and felt heat waves slam breath from lungs. His cohort charged gate amid hurricane of shards. Inside, they found alleys molten, dawnfire file burst, and auroran remnants spawning from coalescing light. Accounts of that night vary. Some say Salvius Vero fought beside Lal Lorcar's private guard, carving path to catacomb mouth in futile bid to shut lattice. Others claim bright robes sabotaged Vero's flank, seeking martyrdom to justify full crusade. What is certain? Nenalata collapsed inward, forming crater half flooded by the Niben, later called Lake Woe. Thousands perished, slaves, citizens, invaders alike. The mirror engine fell into chasm, its plating split, but core still humming at diminished pitch, leaking ribbons of paradoxic light along fissures. News of catastrophe stunned Lilac Council. Belhaza journeyed to crater rim, staring across rippling, black water where once rose alabaster spires. He ordered perimeter wards and forbade salvage dives, knowing lattice remnants could yet destabilize dragonfires. High Sacerdote Halvinius framed disaster as proof Empire could not restrain Marish. Heresy. He demanded new articles empowering Alessian orthodoxy to search and seize across Cyrodiil. Belhaza refused. Tension spiked. Multifaceted fight for Ayleid Twilight had birthed new conflict between throne and faith. Southwest, Abergalis smoldered, under Hunter assault. Iranwi, deprived of lattice and allies, fled with cadre of warlocks along ancient road toward Valenwood border. But Bosma sentinels, now wary, shadowed her every move. In final stand atop basalt pillar, known as Weeping Watch, Iranwi attempted open gate to Cold Harbour, pleading Molag Bal to deliver army. Instead, a single grey wind rushed forth, scouring flesh from loyal thralls. Whether the Daedric prince spurned her or claimed sacrifice, none witness could say. Queen Iranwi's bones hung upon basalt like fused glass, a grim reliquary warning what becomes of those who chase inverted dawns. With circle extinguished, organised Ayleid resistance fractured into scattered cells, some wandering Valenwood, seeking integration, others crossing Abyssian to improbable refuge in Somerset, carrying tales of lost glory to cousins who welcomed them with cautious courtesy. Among those migrants secretly sailed one called Anumaril the Weaver, descendant, perhaps clone, of original tower architect. In his vessel's hold lay plans to recreate white gold upon Golden Coast, carving light and time anew. Somerset histories would one day speak of his crystal-like lore and the refabrication attempt, but that belongs to other scrolls. For Heartland, Ayleid twilight had come. In Cyrodiil proper, Alessian order now grew bolder. They condemned mixed shrines, calling them pit of syncretic corruption. Prefects loyal to Belhaza resisted, but zealots gained commoner support by preaching that patrician councils shielded marish sorcery responsible for Nenalata's doom. Street mobs toppled Vala lamps, shouting for pure starlight free of pagan stain. The tower flickered, torque along Belhaza's neck tightening each time flame wavered. He summoned Senate, arguing need for tolerance or ward would fray. Senators split along tribal lines. Some humans, terrified of another mirror engine, sided with orthodoxy. Some elves, weary of suspicion, left capital for border enclaves. Gradually, the lilac peace thinned into patchwork of statutes enforced unevenly. Through these fractures walked Jennifer of the Eventide, now recovered yet forever changed. Crystal splinters lodged near her heart, whispered eddies of inverted light she strove to ignore. She travelled villages teaching balance, urging folk to recall convergence truth. Light and shadow sustain each other. She met children hacking glowshroom, storks chasing shadow's thrill. She steadied their hands, guiding blades to harvest only what grew back. Many listened. Some cursed her as half-breed. One night, bright robes cornered her by Eld Beach. She survived by riding windstep taut, by green talebearers, but wound reopened, mirror shards radiating dull ache. Realizing message required firmer root, she bound scrolls of Bark Dream into codex, the Eventide Testament, detailing history of Lilac Dawn, of Iranwi's error, of Nenalata's lesson. She hid copies beneath Grat oaks, inside Imperial libraries, false flooring, even among archives of grey loom. Generations hence, scholars of Riemann would cite testament to advocate Valenwood Accords. In her day, few read, but seeds planted nonetheless. Years turned. Belhaza aged, talk weighing heavier, each draconic pulse slower. He named council regent Ivanus Decius to co-govern, hoping human front might temper orthodoxy. Decius proved, cautious yet lacked river calm. Riots surged anew in Bravil over grain tithe. Prefect lictors cracked down, stirring resentment. Elven artisans shuttered shops, migrating west to Anatwil or north to Colovia. The mixed mosaic Alessia dreamed, dulled to fractured inlay, and still dragonfires trembled. Anabray's augurs predicted threshold event. Should faith-fueled relic purges continue with equal fervour, talk might fracture, letting Daedric will seep. Belhaza appealed to elder council, citing greybeard wisdom. Halvinius declared augury, heresy. Debate spiraled until, under moon waning low, the sacerdote led procession into Temple of One, extinguished ceremonial tapers, and proclaimed only Oriel's unsheathed light must shine. Torchbearers thrust purified flame into plinths carved to hold dragonfire. The chamber shook. In white gold's marrow, wardstone coughed spark of discord. The breach was minor, hairline fracture along subsigil lobe, yet Daedric whispers slid through like fog. Citizens awoke from nightmare visions of chained towers made of bone quartz, of crimson moons eclipsing lilac sun. Some fled city, others joined orthodoxy, interpreting visions as prophecy of pure dawn post-Myr. Belhaza, weakened, realized talk alone could not hold ward amid human tumult. He penned final decree: convene convergence vigil every equinox, inviting voices of all creeds to sing balanced hymn inside temple, feeding ward a chorus echoing first union of light and shadow. Bright robes tried to bar entry. Populace pushed, past led by Jennifer, carrying sapling torch fused of welkynd and living root. Under vaulted dome, men and Myr stood shoulder to shoulder, chanting canticle of earned dawn, interlaced with dawn hymn of Sayadain and Bosmeri hum of Yifre's breath. Dragonfire steadied, lilac tint flickering, then settling into warm gold violet. Radiance. Sacerdote Halvinius left before dawn, face pale, entourage silent. Belhaza died that winter, talk passing to no blood heir. Alessia's line had thinned. Records blur whether he fathered children. Instead, council cast lots among distant cousins. Amulet favored a young magistrate named Varian, calm yet untested. His reign would soon meet the storm of righteousness, where orthodoxy at last rebelled, seizing temple, slaying Varian, plunging empire into century of fracture. By then, Ayleid remnants mattered little to thoroughfares of power, yet ghosts of their twilight lingered in ruins dotting jungle, in Vala shards half buried in pilgrim paths. In lullabies, some mothers hummed without knowing origin, soft aelnofex, vowels melding with Colovian cadence beneath roofs of straw. And the Ayleids themselves, what of them? Many who fled to Valenwood wove lineages into Bosmer clans, their pale eyes now glimpsed only when child is born, loving starlight more than leaf glow. Some crossed mountains into Hammerfell, settling among Dwemer enclaves, teaching glass shaping to sons who would one day craft Yokudan mirrors. A few hid in deep ruins, hearts bound to Valar hearts they could not abandon, slowly fading as crystals dimmed. Legends speak of the last luminous court, gathering every mid-year at submerged city of Cyrodiil, dancing upon water hardened by forgotten rite, singing to starlight still trapped beneath waves. Fishermen claim those songs rise like bubbles, carrying notes of grief sweet enough to lull weary to sleep. Whether truth or river tale, it is certain no embassy of Cyrodiil ever contacted Luminous Court. Their twilight remained their own. Far across Abyssian, on Somerset's sun-washed shore, a numeral's grand design would falter, crystal-like lore, rebuffed by towers of lore unbreakable. His disillusioned descendants scattered among Altmer spires, some invoking rite of return, none recognized, others succumbing to ennui that overtakes exiles who outlive memory of home. Tower that birthed them stood in distant Heartland, now Imperial province riven by faith wars. Yet beneath its sub-basements, in quiet loop of echo archive, the Mindarians still preserved Varlasu annals. Scholars who slipped past Flamejoy and scroll dust might glimpse inscription burned into Vala plate by long-dead chronicler. Dawn perfects only itself. Shadow perfects the story. Those words, etched before convergence fire, yet after first towers rose, remain cipher guiding each. Soul who studies decline and asks, is end failure or simply chapter's breath between pages? Thus closed Ayleid twilight, not by single sword nor crowned decree, but by million small hesitations, of archons who hesitated to aid, of peasants who hesitated to forgive, of priests who hesitated to listen. In pause, shadows lengthened, towers emptied, Songs grew faint, but echoes endure in vine-girdled aisles where lilac dusk filters through cracked roof and drips onto broken mosaic. Sit there at hush of evening, and you might hear two melodies interweave. One golden, high and distant like star flare remembered. One low, cool and green like river breathing under moon. Listen long enough, and the space between them writes its own refrain. Promise that light and shadow, sundered yet twin, live on wherever mortal hands seek balance and find it, if only for a dawn.